It's fine. I just started them again, probably 12, so.
Okay then everybody, welcome to tonight. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs and do not use the lifts. Once outside the building, please gather outside the Yorkshire Bank on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door in which you entered the room or by the fire exit, which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit signs. If you need any assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff. Please also make sure that your mobile phones are turned off or set to silent. And just to let you know that the meeting will be recorded and put out a future broadcast. Okay, so apologies.
We've got apologies from Councillor Bedworth, substitute Councillor Andrew Sargent, who's on his way. Councillor Walmsley, substitute Councillor Tromans. Councillor Doughty, substitute Councillor Hancock, and Mr Idris Shea.
Okay, thank you. Okay, minutes. Is everybody okay if I start the minutes from the previous meeting? No objections. Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. I should sign that shortly after this. Declarations of interest. Is there anything apart from what is listed? Anything else? Yours from yesterday, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, do you wanna just...
Oh yeah, I'm dropping them at school.
Anything else? No. Public consultation, we've received nothing. Brilliant. Okay then. Right, so next on the list now is community safety, and I can see Dave.
Sorry, Chair, yeah, straight from Crown Court.
Losing twos, I'm all the way to do it. Right, okay, Rachel, so to you.
Hi, good evening everyone. I'm Rachel Jackson, I'm the Communities Manager at the Borough Council. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the lead officer for crime disorder at this council, and that involves the Nuneaton Bedworth Safe Communities Partnership. So the first report that you've got from me this evening is in regards to the quarter 2 performance for NABSCOP, which is the Community Safety Partnership. And it covers the period of July to September 2018. I sent you all a colour copy because sometimes it's easier to see the black and white doesn't kind of appear very well when you're looking at it. So if I take you through the NABSCOP performance indicators that appear on the second page of my report, the local performance indicators are based on the priorities that we identify within an annual strategic assessment. For those of you that have been part of this scrutiny panel previously, you would have received and been part of this process in March 2018, where we looked and planned for what are our priorities currently. Going forward, I'm hoping to bring a further report back to this panel before the end of the financial year with details of the strategic assessment and the recommendations for 2019-20. So hopefully when that's available I'll be able to bring it here. It is a confidential report when we get it, so we'll have to do it within a closed session. But basically, emerging from the strategic assessment, we identified 3 key priorities. Violent crime, so that's all areas of violence. Acquisitive crime, and that's in response to that's in respect to residential burglary and commercial burglary. And also we look at antisocial behaviour, and that's all categories of antisocial behaviour, so that's personal, environmental and nuisance. I think got that one. So you'll see here, for all of the violent crime categories, apart from the exception of other sexual offences, there has been an increase. Now this reflects a national and a county-wide trend. So you'll see here that violence against the person and sexual offences have increased by 8%. Violence against the person with injury offences have increased by 6%. Violence against the person without injury have increased by 14%. Rape offences have increased by 16%, and other sexual offences have reduced by 38%. In relation to the two acquisitive crime elements, residential burglary has reduced by 7%. So residential burglary is like what used to be burglary dwelling, so it's the house burglary type thing that we're looking at here. Burglary business and commercial has increased by 5%. Good news in relation to antisocial behaviour, overall there's a 5% reduction. However, deliberate small fires, which is looked after by the arson reduction team of the fire service, has increased by 88%. Total recorded crime has reduced by 2%. For domestic abuse, there have been 730 total violence against a person with injury offences. Of these, 241 are related to domestic abuse, and proportionately that represents 33% of all total violence against a person offences. We expect to see roughly around a third of all violent offences attributed to domestic abuse. If it goes below that, we feel that there's an issue with reporting, so we want to encourage more people to come forward. If more people come forward, we're pleased that people are coming forward. So if you do see an increase in that percentage, although we don't want any violence to happen, it is positive that element of violent crime is increasing. And the final page of this report, so you'll see the multicoloured areas here. These are award-based statistics, and what we use these for is to track our progress. So it's to track whether there is an emergent trend within a particular area. It's also to identify if we've done something positive and learn from that. And I just wanted to draw your attention to Abbey and Abbey Town. So Abbey Town and Abbey North. You'll see for total recorded crime, there's a significant reduction there as green for both Abbey Town and Abbey North in Nuneaton. And this is reflective of an operation, a joint operation, a police-led operation that we've been part of within Nabscott called Operation Farrell. I don't know if you recall, we've talked about it within this meeting previously. There's been quite a lot of publicity about it, whereby we mapped an organised crime group. We developed a process of how we were going to address it. So, for instance, as a council, we implemented a sensitive lessons policy at Lexington Court. We implemented closure orders to remove people who were dealing drugs and participating in criminal activity, so we've closed down premises. The police have conducted numerous warrants and arrests and etc. So this here is a real good news story for Abbey. They've been blighted in the past by crime and antisocial behaviour, so we're really pleased with that. That said, across the borough, we do look at the other trends, and we do move resources around when we need to. Any questions?
Well, it's over to you then, but please keep it on the report that's in front of you. Councillor Concord.
So, a couple of things. For the antisocial behaviour, obviously the 101 service is really key for people reporting stuff, and that has had lots of issues over the last 3 or 4 years. If those issues are getting better or worse because people have been taken off the call centre, you can get a perceived drop in antisocial behaviour when actually it's more difficult to report it. So can you give us any assurance that actually the ability to report is actually as good or better? I mean, there was talk of reporting over the internet as well, but that hasn't happened yet. That's the first point. On your ASB also, you've got nuisance and environmental in there. We do need to actually keep an eye on fly tipping and nuisance fires, and particularly if we're introducing garden waste charges next year, to have some numbers so we can actually see before and after.
Concord, just keep it on the report. It's
Sorry, Chair.
It's not about green waste or anything like that. It's just about this report.
Sorry, Chair.
No.
I'm on scrutiny and I would like to ask some questions.
You'll keep it on the report.
The report, I would like just to know next year if there's an increase in fly tipping and nuisance fires. That is not an unreasonable thing to ask. This is external scrutiny, and all I'm asking is like the street lighting.
It's about the report. It's about the report. It's not about fly tipping. It's about this report that's in front of you.
Councillor Watkins, this is a scrutiny committee. I want a couple of minutes to say some things. You can disagree, you can do what you want, but I have my minutes.
I'm keeping it on the report.
And on the report is the statistics.
It's not about fly tipping.
Fly tipping is part of antisocial behaviour.
I'm going to move on from you unless you move on to the question about the report.
Chair, I would like to at least ask, can we keep a log of fly tipping and Antisocial burning.
Fighting pin is not a police matter.
It is an ASB matter. Environmental. Can we please not shut me down when I want to talk? It is quicker to let me
moving
talk.
on, right?
It is quicker to let me talk.
Okay.
This is the only
Councillor
scrutiny committee I'm
Golby.
on.
Councillor
I would
Golby.
like to know about various things.
Councillor Golby.
Borough. I noticed that ASB is up, and I have to say I do strongly encourage people to call it in, so that's probably got something to do with it. Living there, I can't say that I've experienced an increase as such. However, I know people are ringing it in more often now, because every time somebody contacts me, it's usually motorbikes, to be fair. The motorbikes are driving everybody mad, and I think this goes across the piece. I don't think it's just in my patch, but every time anybody contacts me, ring it in. People are going to be concerned if they see the violence against the person and sexual offences. Now, I know through being on this in the past that this is mainly to do with domestic issues in that sort of thing. It's not like we've got people rampaging on the streets, sexually assaulting people. So can we just make that clear that it is usually a restricted number of people, but repeat circumstances in the domestic sense, rather than people being nabbed off the street to be molested?
Yeah, I think some of that, I mean, as Rachel's pointed out, there's a third of that is related to DA, but equally there's 2/3 that isn't.
Yeah.
And it's trying to understand that. But I would suggest that some of that would be related to the nighttime economy as well.
Yeah.
Even though we police that quite robustly.
Yeah. Don't have the need of that.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Hancox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, when you see some of the increases, and I don't really want to be parochial, but it jumps out at you in Bedworth in the town centre, recorded crime from 71 to 91. And I just wonder what other detail we might have. There's other bits as well where the ASB in South jumps up, well, doubles. But I know certainly in the town we've had a long-standing problem with people making a nuisance of themselves, particularly in Tesco's. So I don't know whether that's sort of a hub of that town centre.
Yeah, it will be built, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, the issue around that is trying to encourage, well, I don't know how you do it, but trying to encourage large stores like Tesco, where there's a natural gravitational pull for youths to gather and cause problems, is they should be putting enough staff on of their own to be able to police this, because as we all know, we're absolutely stretched, particularly with our safer neighbourhood teams. I don't know about the situation in Nuneaton, but particularly in Bedworth, the amount of SNT policing has been reduced so much that we're really struggling now. I'm happy to stop if people want to come back, but I've got something else to say, Chair. I'm not happy however you want me to do it.
No.
Shall I carry on, yeah. Okay. I'm also interested in that section that Rachel introduced us to, really, 4.3. And I think that, maybe it's a cynic in me, but I think what jumps out of that to me is it's about the reporting of crime, really. And I think with sexual crime, there's been a lot of publicity and encouragement to do that. So I think that's maybe quite rightly why that's happened. But then in relation to the reductions, i.e. burglary and business burglary and small fires, I mean, again, they're neighbourhood things. You know, when we had a presence of community support officers, etc., in the neighbourhoods, and I think a lot of people are thinking to themselves, well, I know the situation with reduction in police numbers, there's no point me reporting it, and of course we don't know, do we? Because if it's not reported, it's not reported. And like somebody else, I think Councillor Golby said, certainly wherever I am at meetings with residents or groups and that, I encourage them to do that, and they don't always take it on board. I mean, we've got a serious issue at the moment in one of the complexes in Bedworth about people accessing that and other problems going on there. But I don't think anybody's actually reported it.
I think just in response to that, and I'll let David come in a moment, in terms of activity to address these issues, that's what NABSCOT's there for. So yes, okay, you could perceive some of these to be police-related, issues that they need to respond to. As a partnership, we try to kind of utilise the resources of other agencies. So, for example, with deliberate small fires, it's up by 88%. Now, seasonally, we had a very dry summer. We had lots of opportunities for people to light fires. When we looked at a comparison to previous years, last year was a wet summer. In other years, there's normally around 64, an average of 64 fires during that period of time. So we've got the fire service who we're able to work with, and we get some funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner's office. Through that, we've got the ASBIT team and the ASFIT team, and they do the quick fire responses. So if there's an area, say Whittlesey Park or Riversley Park, that's inaccessible to, say, a police vehicle or a fire vehicle, we've got a team of people who go out on their bikes to go and address this. So yes, we are all concerned about safer neighbourhood team resources, but at the same time, we try to maximise the opportunities we've got by working with other agencies to kind of remedy the situation as well.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to talk about Tesco's build, yes, a lot of the ASB, particularly town centre, is called in by Tesco. So much so that I directed recently one of my sergeants to hold a meeting with the manager there, who's, in fairness to him, he's fairly new.
Yeah.
I think he's been there a few months now. And actually he recognised that the security staff that he was getting in, which were not specifically employed by Tesco, they weren't very good. And by that I mean that they were dealing with really low-level nuisance issues around the entrance to the store and the car park that they could have easily dealt with themselves, but kept putting calls into Wiltshire Police, so much so I think he's only in the last few days sacked 2 security guards and will be making sure that the agency they use get some better ones in, so to speak. So we have got really good communication lines with Tesco's at the moment, so we are monitoring that. We expect it to go down again. The surprising thing for some people, I know Lynn from Neighbourhood Watch has brought this up quite recently with the Chief Constable on 2 occasions. There's a perception that my team at Bedworth has vastly reduced. It actually hasn't. We're 1 PCSO down at the moment, and that's because the female officers are on maternity leave. We did have 3 officers leave in quite quick succession, all PCSOs, but we quickly replaced them. Bedworth has had 2 PCs now for at least the last 7-8 years. So we are actually only 1 PCSO down at the moment for the whole team. So the perception of the team having vastly reduced is actually incorrect. So,
well, all I can say, Chair, is that isn't the information we were given at a Neighbourhood Watch meeting by a member of the force.
how long ago was that?
About 6 weeks.
2 months
Can
ago.
I just add that I've had the same information at a meeting, well, at the meeting that we went to.
That wasn't Bedworth.
No, it wasn't Bedworth, but it was the same message.
Yeah, well, I apologise for that. I don't know who gave you that message, but it's incorrect.
I've talked to
No, it is, but it's just...
Okay, Councillor Bryan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Rachel's answered my question, part of my question about the deliberate small fires aspect. I'm presuming, like you said, that is seasonal. It's something that's effectively now under control, and it was just limited to sort of park areas and.
Yeah, you will see a seasonal increase during that period of time. You've got
I know we had,
I
know we had a particular problem around the Nook, for example, you know, and it was just 1 or 2 individuals that were causing all the problem.
Yeah, Chair, there have actually been a number of arrests made, and there was 1 particular individual who was responsible for low double figures for these fires. and he's been dealt with suitably, and he's actually getting educated as well, not just via the Justice Service, but by the Fire Service as well.
If you remember following the last meeting, I did say that we would have an increase in small fires.
Yeah.
And I also expected other things to go up, surprisingly not. I expected a vehicle,
Yeah.
vehicle crime to go up a bit as well, but seems to have done okay. Councillor Tremens.
Thank you, Chair. A few points I'd just like to touch on. Some of them are very simple. The first one's just standalone about the other sexual offences having reduced by such a marked amount. If Rachel and Inspector Williams could just opine on exactly what's in that category, and is this about, you know, the simple sexting and nonsense or whatever that's now actually not being recorded as a crime, people are being told to grow up and be more sensible, and the education of young people is helping sort that out. I hope that's part of it, but obviously I'd be interested in your views. The other thing is we're looking at reported crime going up, and actually that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we are encouraging, as many councillors do here, residents to report more to the police, to give them more intel via 101. And there's virtual neighbourhood watch schemes that have sprung up, particularly on Facebook, who've done some really excellent work in that regard. And I'd be interested in Rachel's view, and also in Inspector Williams' view, on the impact that those virtual neighbourhood watch teams have made, whether it's all positive or whether there's some negative aspects, and what bits of that can we be encouraging, and is there anything as a council we can do to support them? I don't know, put a link on our Facebook site, or mention the Facebook page in the internet, things like that. And to back up that, it's one thing to encourage people to call, but a lot of the feedback that we've received and have continued to for a long time is that people can't always get through to 101. We know there's busy times, and 999 must take priority over that. But I think this particular committee would really benefit from having the 101 and 999 stats attached to this, so that they can see the kind of average response time, the abandon rate, the call volumes actually themselves. Because I just think people don't appreciate the huge volume of calls that go in at peak time to the police, and what they have to deal with, those peaks and troughs. And I think that would be really useful to see that. And then the final thing, very different, I just wanted to get an update on where we are with the taxi marshals, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Go on. A few bits there to go through. Do you want to do the sexual offences?
Yeah, I mean, without doing some specific analysis on that, I think it would be difficult to answer that one. You know, like you, sometimes I look at these figures and I see a reduction, I think great, but why? Equally, when we see an increase, it's understanding that. So it would be remiss of me probably to give my view of why I think that there's been a reduction. I think it is about good education. We are doing a lot with schools. Schools are doing a lot themselves, and I think we're doing a lot more around social media. But equally, I think to answer that honestly, we probably need to do some specific analysis around that.
Yeah. We can ask what that looks like. If you want more of a breakdown detail, I can ask that. And
Yeah, just a little more, I think.
Sorry, the way I understood, did you want to know what's in the other?
Yes, so the other sexual offences has fallen. It's what kind of offences are in there, and kind of why. Is it because of the better education and whatever?
Yeah, I think it's likely to be harassment. It's probably likely to be sexual touching, that type of thing, and probably the social media element of sexting, etc. But as I said, without doing the specific analysis, you know, I might not be being overly accurate there.
That's fine.
So we'll find that one out for you.
Yeah, and then once we know what goes into that bucket, then we know for good and won't need to ask again.
Okay. Neighbourhood watch in terms of the impact of that.
Yeah, the virtual neighbourhood
Yeah.
watches, the Facebook ones. Positive?
From my point of view, excellent. I think inside 10, 11 months, I think Lee Hayward, who started it off, fantastic. He's now part of the Neighbourhood Watch exec meeting that I attend on a monthly basis. Something like 10,000 members now. I have to say they've got, for each area of Nuneaton that's involved, they have people who monitor it really well. It's quite a closed group as well. I think there has been some sort of negativity between Safer Streets, who've started their own little group with Neighbourhood Watch, and police have been involved in that. The only thing I would say for councillors around the table who have had involvement potentially with Safer Streets is that whilst we haven't got an issue with what they're doing as a group, we don't support that. We're not working with them. They will make contact with our control room of a night time. They normally do nighttime patrols, as I understand it. But they have been written to by our chief officers to say, absolutely great what you're doing in terms of volunteering, but equally you shouldn't be there as a replacement for police officers. We've also got special constabulary that we use, and we work very, very closely with Neighbourhood Watch. And so, you know, I get the feeling with Safer Streets sometimes they say they've got a lot more support from councillors than they actually perhaps have.
And then,
taxi marshals.
10999.
1019, yeah, we can bring that, we can get that. Oh, in fact, would it be helpful if you had that before the next meeting? Just
Yeah, just do one like that. Get to when.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
Puts it in context then, people
Yeah.
realise just what the volume of
Yeah.
work is.
Yeah.
What I would say, Chair, on 101 is, yeah, we're still getting complaints on 101. It has to be recognised also that is a national service. Yes, we are probably struggling to cope with the demand of calls we're having. And I think one of the things that we've struggled with for some months now within Wiltshire is a real influx and exit of new staff that have to be trained, etc. So we've probably had a few seats empty in our control room that we perhaps wanted to fill a bit quicker. We are getting back up to capacity. But yeah, 101 is always seems to be an issue. But my understanding is nationally they're putting a lot of more money into it. And so we don't have really control over that service. Warwickshire's a standalone force. But equally, as you say, Councillor, it's probably a good idea for you to have an idea of what demand is going into the control room. Because we don't, even I don't see that data.
And yeah, the taxi marshals was the last
Taxi
thing.
marshals, okay, so in terms of taxi marshals, so that, I don't know if you all know, we use Police and Crime Commissioner funding to employ taxi marshals on an unofficial taxi rank in Newgate Street. And the idea is that they kind of move the flow of traffic, the taxis through, get people out of town as quickly as possible to move them on. So they've been in place for about 2 years now, and when we look at the kind of the impact on the baseline of violent crime, violence against a person with injury offences and ASB, we can see tangible reductions. At this moment in time, we're reviewing the provider of the contract, so we will still have them. It's likely that they will be working maybe 2 evenings a week and available on bank holidays and that kind of thing. So they're still around. We've still got the funding, and there is a kind of a demonstrable output from them. You can see the kind of the difference in the original figures to what they are now. And the good thing is when the marshals aren't actually there, because what we wanted was for the taxis all to be in one place and people knew where to go rather than kind of dispersing across the town centre. They're able to just when the marshals aren't there, the taxis are just flowing through town, picking people up and taking them away. So it's good.
Thank you.
Councillor Galway.
On the ASB, I've just had a look down the list. 5 out of the 7 areas that have seen an increase all had unauthorised traveller encampments. So could we say that is not a coincidence that ASB goes up, or is it a coincidence, or is there any sort of quantifiable evidence to show in that sort of sense?
That's that, Chair. I think in terms, we clearly had a bad year with travellers, probably as bad as I've known it for the last 4 to 5. Even though Nuneaton seems to...
Councillor
Town centres is always an issue in terms of violence and the perceived safety. There's been quite a bit on Facebook and quite a bit of media, particularly like damage to Christmas tree the other night. People don't really have confidence in the CCTV anymore. So, but when you read the annual reports for it, it's actually got lots of good stats for these CCTV.
Very good.
So it would be quite useful just to give some reassurance that, yeah, we are actually monitoring it and it does actually...
CCTV is excellent. Obviously, they will check the cameras. We'll have walk-arounds every now and then as well to make sure that there's nothing in their way. But equally, there's the retail radio, the WRCI, which works fine. That's linked into the nighttime economy as well. Yes, I recognise, everyone knows we've got a problem with beggars stroke homeless at the moment. We have an operation that we're running with that. That's going really well, believe it or not. I know you're still seeing people in doorways, particularly School 21. but I can assure you that it won't be long before we make a real big impact on them. We have to follow a journey though. I think people think we can just rock up and say, you move. It doesn't work like that.
And just for clarity, the CCTV is being monitored in the evenings.
Yeah.
And the CCTV is managed by us
Oh,
as
yes.
well. So it's not owned and managed by the company. If they access it, obviously have kind of free access to it, but it is owned and managed by NBC.
See, they have a police radio and they can, we can close that down, but when we patch in, the pictures that are shown from the Nuneaton, the cameras, the Bedworth cameras, actually go into our control room. So it works very well.
I've never heard anyone call the CCTV. We're lucky to have it, I think. So,
Yeah, very.
and I often see your cars parked in the car park, so they must be doing something here. So,
Yeah, usually downloading the footage.
Councillor Sawyer.
We met, Councillor Concord mentioned the sort of town centre trouble, but there's also, well, I have spoke to you about this, there's also now trouble happening because sort of urban pubs are creating something, they're getting bands, they're getting discos, etc., etc. Is there anything that's been done about that? Because, I mean, I spoke to you about this probably a couple of weeks ago, didn't I, where you see a lot of police in the town centre, but you very rarely see them out in the suburbs.
Yeah, believe it or not, you probably don't see them because we do have usually there are a number of officers that are allocated to a particular vehicle to go and do these licensing checks. Equally though, not forgetting we have to go out into the North Wiltshire area as well, so we have to cover Anderson and Coleshill. But yeah, we are really alive to what other pubs are doing. However, we do have a licensing sergeant for the force whose job it is to review everyone's licensing and what their applications contain. So we are quite robust with them. We've got a really good relationship with the licensing officers with the council. We regularly attend what we call Mallam meetings to do with multi-agency licensing. So yeah, I mean, if we've got a problem premises, trust me, we will deal with it robustly.
Anybody got anything else? Good. Right, so this report is for noting, but also we do need to concentrate on the NABSCOP side of it because we will be asked, and we'll ask next meeting maybe.
I don't think we're ready for that. So next meeting is the 7th of February. It won't go to NABSCOP to the 14th of February, so it'll be over there.
Okay. So we will be asked to review what we asked NABSCOP to look at. So we're going to need to think about that. If you're happy with everything we're looking at, then that's fine. But if not, if you want something else added, something taken away or replaced or whatever, we need to think about that.
Sorry, I was going to say you'll have the opportunity to have a look at the strategic assessment before any decision is made. You can influence decisions if you think that. So, for instance, sometimes the strategic assessment will say don't have residential burglary as a priority, and you think actually for our local people it's really important that we do, we do recognise the impact that it has, and the reason why it might suggest it not to be a priority is because the formula that they use, they're using something called a morale scorecard, and the matrix that they use is kind of based on different kind of priorities. So, if, for instance, if NABSCOP said, well, actually, we don't think burglary is a priority, you could scrutinise them and say, well, hang on a minute, why not? And legitimately, it's within your gift to challenge the decision that's made there. But when I give you the report, I'll kind of explain how the decisions are made and how the recommendations for what priorities are brought forward, what they're based on.
All in all, I think that's a pretty good report. Deliberate small fires we expected to do. Then you were cutting the grass too much, then you weren't cutting it enough, and all sorts, but there you go. How's Concord?
Just a quick point on this thing that's coming up. Can we have all the crime data for more than 2 years before we review it? Because you can't, because obviously just looking at 1 year and last year.
The strategic assessment is based on information it'll be from November 2017 to November 2018. So that's the period of time that it's based on. And it does that because if we're asking, the analysts haven't got an infinite resource, so we have to narrow it down to a particular window of time, and that is what we do every year. Yeah, the only thing we could do is refer to the strategic assessment that was conducted the previous year for you to be able to make those comparisons yourself, but NABSCOP won't be doing that because they base it on the document that they get for that period of time.
It was just the direction of travel to see if burglaries are half what they were or
Okay,
double what they
I understand that. So burglary dwelling and burglary residential are actually, you're not comparing like with like, are you?
No.
They've changed the categories. So within the strategic assessment, if you take that as an example, it will explain that. What it will also do is you will have a trend, you know, like you've got in here, like a graph that plots it over a period of time. You will be able to see whether it's kind of suddenly shot up like that. So it won't be that you're looking at it in isolation, just although it's crime disorder through that period of time, there is comparison on a graph for previous years. So you'll be able to see that.
Right, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Dave. Discharge protocol.
Thank you. So, last...
Look, it's on the edge.
yeah, that's what I'm hoping too. So at the last meeting, we came and did a presentation around end-of-life care, but there was a wider discussion in the room around the way that we manage discharge of patients from the George Eliot Hospital. So we said that we'd come back and talk in more detail about that. So I'm David Elkingham, I'm the Managing Director of the George Eliot Hospital, and this is Billy Wilkinson, who's Deputy Director of Nursing. Billy's got considerable expertise in management of discharge of patients, so she's going to take us through a short presentation, and then we'll happily deal with any questions that you might have at the end of the presentation. So,
Thank you. So we can go to the first one straight away. So what I wanted to do was just talk to you a little bit to start with about actually what at the George Eliot numbers-wise we're dealing with. So this is a part of a presentation that was given to the CQC who've just been to visit us. So this is looking at 17-18 data. So we serve 300,000 population. We have around 2,200 members of staff, but that's whole-time equivalent. So actually there's quite a lot of part-time staff. So actually there's many more people who are involved in working at George Eliot, and that's one of the keys, because I've worked in a number of different places, but for us, our local population provides a lot of our workforce. So we've got 286 acute and general beds. When you add on to that the maternity beds, it takes us to a little over 300, and then obviously we add on the neonatal cots and that sort of thing. But that's the general beds, and 2,145 births. So go on to the next one, thank you. So this is just some data here around just over 80,800 attendances into our ED department. 270,000 plus outpatient attendances, 12,433 operations, and I'm not going to go through the other one, but that's the stuff that our X-ray department does. So based on that, I then looked at, in the same period of time, how many patients were actually... Oh, just pop back a second, that's fine. Sorry, I should stop nodding. So about 23,000 patients were discharged in that period of time. So when we think about that, that's 23,000 people going home. And of those, about 89% went into their own home, so went back to where they'd come from. So whether that's from a nursing home, from a care home, or from their own home environment. So that's the majority of our patients are going back to where their normal place of residence is. About 3% their lives end during that admission. 3% go on to do some rehabilitation before their final placement is identified. About 3% go from us into a care home. And then 0.5% go into a mental health environment straight from us. 0.5% go on to have maternity care elsewhere. So that's our transfers between us and UHCW. And then there's a 1% left over, which you do the maths, and that's lots of different places. So people who've come to us who go into a hostel, people who've come to us and end up going to back to prison maybe where they've come from, or babies that go into foster care. So that's what that last little bit is about. So yeah, okay. Oh. So what I just wanted to talk about first, what is a good discharge? What are we trying to achieve? So the statement that we've got at the top is actually the statement that is part of our policy, which is that the well-informed, well-prepared patients and relatives and families are prerequisites to successful discharge and the successful discharge experience, because I think there's a difference between getting home safely and feeling that you've got home safely. We've got to get both in the right place. And then the other one is obviously then subsequently remaining at home safely and the community care meeting their needs. So what we do about that is that we're now planning discharge from the moment that patients are admitted. So for those elective patients who come in, then actually before they come in, so at their pre-operative assessment, we're having those conversations that say, okay, so when you go home, this is what may change, this is what we might need to put in place for you. We expect you to go home in this many days, so that the patient and their family are prepared. For the non-elective, so those patients who come in as an emergency, that's a little bit more complex, and that takes a bit more planning, but we still do that from the moment that they arrive. And I'll talk to you a little bit later about the new documentation that we've got in place, which is helping us to do that, excuse me. We've got the multidisciplinary assessment, which is this paperwork that I'm talking about, so that we are actually having the conversations with patients on the day that they arrive to say, you know, what have you already got in place, what do we need to help you, what wasn't working when you were at home, so we can start working on it straight away. And the planning has to be done with families, predominantly patients, families and their carers, because we're not going to be there when they get home, so it's about helping them to be able to manage that. We have 4 key questions, which is something that we have started to really implement this year. And those are the 4 key questions there. And this is around knowing whether or not patients actually are engaged and involved, because I can talk all I like to my ward staff about engaging patients, but if the patient hasn't been spoken to, they don't know what's going on. So the 4 questions are: what's wrong with me and what are you trying to exclude? What have we agreed to do, and when will it be sorted out for me? What do I need to achieve to get home? And then, assuming that the recovery is ideal, when might I go home? So the patient should know what's wrong with them, what we're doing about it, what they need to get done before they go home, and when that date might be. And if the patient knows all of that, then they and their families can start preparing to go home. So I've just put in the bottom there that we have a discharge protocol, which is a huge document, and it was written in June 2017. Its review date is 2019, but it's a bit iterative, and so we're reviewing it all the time. So it's got an official review date of 2019, but actually as new things come up and new ideas and best practice comes clear, that gets put into that. The director responsible for it is the Director of Operations, but from the point of view of the whole team, we all support that. And it was authored by our bed management team, and I just wanted to be clear who our bed management team is. So we have a matron for capacities, so we have a really senior nurse who looks after the flow in the hospital and makes sure that the flow is working, and she is the one who manages then our discharge liaison nurses, our bed managers, and it's a very nursing focused team, because we feel very strongly that actually you need that clinical input to be able to manage the resource, which is the beds and the flow across the organisation. Okay, thank you. So we've got the emergency care intensive support team, which is part of the NHSI, who support us in best practice. And they've published a best practice guidance, which is what we implement at the hospital, which is Safer Care Bundle. And this is all about how does the hospital work on a day-to-day basis to ensure that the flow works through the organisation. So we have beds for patient coming in, that patients don't stay any longer than they need to, and that they are well prepared for going home. So you could, it's a little bit small to see from where you are, but the key thing is that every patient is seen by a consultant before midday, that all patients know their expected date of discharge, that patients are identified as being ready to go home, and we start the first ones going home before 10 o'clock in the morning. So that starts the flow of the organisation. But it also means that patients who go home when it's daylight, when their GP is still open, when their family is available, when they get home and they discover that there isn't any milk in the fridge, that can be dealt with for them, rather than sending them home later in the day. So that's another key element for us. We also have a thing which we call the golden patient. So those patients who are ready for discharge tomorrow morning, we identify today as our golden patients, and each ward is expected to identify a golden patient, and those patients we then prioritise in the morning, which starts our flow for the day. So this is all about getting the organisation working. We have early discharge, so we expect patients to be going home earlier in the day, and then we have a systematic review process, which the guidance suggests that we should look at any patient who's been in the organisation for more than 14 days and look at them as a and it's a horrible name, but we call them stranded patients who've got stuck in the system. But actually, as an organisation, we look at them at 7 days. So we actually review on a twice weekly basis all patients who have been in the organisation for more than 7 days. And that may be that they are still requiring treatment or inpatient care, and therefore they just go on staying on the books. But there are some patients who, because they are complex, need extra support. And so in that meeting, we have our colleagues from the from social work and the community and the CCG to try and wrap around those patients the solutions to the more complex discharge. Thank you very much. So we've got predominantly 3 types of discharge. So there's that 89% I talked about earlier, which are the simple discharges. Now, those can be predominantly those patients who've come in for an operation, know about it, ready to go home, and their wife or their husband comes and picks them up, and they go home. They will, within that banding, we also have patients who are who came in on a care package, but the care package continues to exist and is there for them as long as they're up to 14 days. We just restarted, so they're going back to the same. And there are patients who need a small increase in their care package, and again we would call those simple discharges. Then we have those patients who are potential rehabilitation patients, so patients who aren't well, but they're aren't optimised, but are ready to go home. And we've got 2 different options for them. If they have a Warwickshire GP, they can go to the Haven Nursing Home, where we have nominated beds that they can go into, and they get 6 weeks or up to 6 weeks of additional physiotherapy and rehabilitation prior to them going home. And for the Leicester GPs, it's they transferred to Hinkley and Bosworth. I think the issue for that is that what we're not doing is sending them home on a bigger package of care when they actually don't need it. We're optimising them before they go home. And then there's the Pathway 3 patients, which are those patients who require an assessment under continuing health care. And again, I've put there how we do that. And we have a trusted assessment with the community health, and we use a checklist, and those patients are assessed, and then they either go to Arbury Lodge, which is within the organisation but a separate area. With the Warwickshire GPs and the Leicestershire GPs, they then get a plan made whilst they're in hospital and get sent home. We also have what we call special discharges, and those predominantly for us are the ones that go onto our Ripple pathway. So those are patients who are at the end of their lives who want to die at home, and we can move them out very, very quickly. So if they and their family make the decision that they want to die at home, we can move them within about 3 or 4 hours, and Hospice at Home supports us to do that. And that's a very positive, people reflect on it as being a very positive experience. If a family member desperately wants to go home and we can put a package of care around them very quickly, then we don't miss opportunity. Thank you. I'm not going to go through this, but this is the checklist that my team works through on a daily basis to ensure that we make the same decisions for everybody and that we make the right decisions around where patients go. So you'll see that it's around simple and complex discharging. Thank you. So, who does what? Whose responsibility is which bit? So the ward nurses plan discharges and they do that from admission. They host multidisciplinary team meetings, so where we get the whole team and the family around with the patient to talk about, what we're going to do to get home. They also talk to families and carers with their patients around what the options are, and we have a little bit of a process which is section 2s and section 5s, which is how we work with social services to ensure that they know where we've got to in the process. We have a team of discharge liaison nurses who are the ones who help us to support the more complex discharges, and they work with the ward teams. They guide them through the more complex discharges, and I'm being really clear here about they don't do the more complex discharges. I expect the ward teams to be able to do that, because if the discharge liaison nurse isn't there, we've still got to be able to do that more complex discharge. They do the daily flow meetings, which are at 11 o'clock in the morning, and the ward managers come and talk about those patients who they've got concerns with or need extra support with getting that discharge to happen. The stranded patients meetings, which I've already talked about. Liaison with the CCG and other partners, and actually we have a presence on a daily basis from both the CCG and from social work to help us to move those patients through. And then we have a first choice process. So if we find that a patient is unable to agree a next step, then we have a process where we move through that decision with them. Thank you. So in this year, so 2017-18 and 18-19, particularly 18-19, we've got our quality commitments, which is part of our annual plan, and we have put a number of things into that to improve the patient's experience of discharge, and one of them is those 4 questions, and I'm actually working with a team to do those, the audits around, are those 4 questions being asked, and are patients actually aware of what's going on in the process. We have the red to green process, and I don't know if anyone's ever talked to you about red to green, but red to green is basically days are productive or non-productive, and a non-productive day is a red day and a productive day is a green day. So if you're just sitting on the ward waiting for something to happen, that's definitely a red day. But if something is actively happening, that's a green day, and the whole point is to move all of the days into green days. So we take out those red days, shorten the waiting times for patients so that they get the treatment and the investigations that they need. We're using, as I said, the 4 questions. We're working with the discharge team to revamp our discharge booklet, so that we have a discharge booklet at the moment, but currently it's a little bit not fit for purpose maybe, or just a little bit in requirement of some refreshment. So we're doing that at the moment, and as part of the quality commitments, we've also undertaken to provide patients with copies of their discharge letters and their clinic correspondence, and that will be achieved by April this year, so that all patients will have more information than they had previously. The Safer Care Bundle, which I've already talked to you about, the stranded patients meetings. We're doing a lot of work around the TTO process, which is the tablets to take home, because I think patients will have expressed to you their concerns around how long it takes for medications to get to them, and bringing some of that time out of that so that we move the process forward. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing around those golden patients, which is making sure that their medications are on the ward prior to the patient being ready to go home, so we do that nice and efficiently. And then another thing that we're doing is with the Warwickshire Fire and Rescue is hospital to home, and they've started taking those patients who are able to be transferred home in a car to their own home, but they are offering an enhanced service because they're settling them and they're going back at day 3 to do a safe and well check, So that's some partnership working that is really improving our safer discharges. So thank you. And there we are. Thank you for listening to me, and I will certainly attempt to answer some questions, and if I can't answer them, I'm sure David can.
Right, thank you for that. Over to you.
Right, Chair. You've mentioned about families and carers, which is brilliant, but what happens to a patient who doesn't have family, doesn't have carers? Do you classify them as complex, or how does it work?
The complexity is around the things that need to happen to get them home. I think from the point of view of patients, if they don't have families and they have capacity, we talk with them and we do it with them. For those that don't have any support, obviously you enhance what you offer them, but that could be still a simple discharge, because it could be just an increased package of care to ensure that they have that support that they need. One of the really positive things about the fire service is that actually they link them then to some of the staying at home stuff. We also work with age concern if they're of that age, and get some of those befriending services. We have a system of social prescribing, so we have a way of linking patients who are very isolated with some of the things that stop them being isolated, because we're very aware of the fact that those patients who are going to come, back and have failed discharges, quite often it's because of the lack of support and that isolation and loneliness.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that. I found that very interesting. A few questions came out of it, but before I start, I'd like to say, that it's such good news about Fire and Rescue doing the safe and well checks. Obviously, fire looking for business. If historic trends of house fires going down, that's brilliant example of collaborative working across agencies, and that's to be applauded. And I hope you can do more of that. Really, I wanted to understand about the stranded patients and the bed blocking that we all hear about on the news and all the rest of it. What I think it would help us as a group of councillors to understand is what actually is causing that. What are the main groups in there? I know people will have lots of different reasons, but there must be a majority that fall into one or two groups, like you haven't got enough occupational therapists to do the assessment to get them home, or the family's unprepared to take them back, or how many times do we hear this on social media and get complaints from our residents, their care home isn't prepared to take them back, the care home they came from and that they're paying for. And that really, I've got a lot of elderly residents, and that's very worrying. So I'd like your view on that. The second thing is, I'd like to understand your readmission rates. It's one thing to have a very efficient process to get people out the door, but if it's too keen to get them out the door, then we're likely to get quite high readmission rates. So I'd like to understand what yours are and how they compare with, kind of your peers. And then thirdly, there is that 3% that don't get discharged because I'm afraid they die. And mortality rates, forgive me, but have been a big issue at George Eliot. So I'd like to know how that 3% trends with the historic data that's come out of George Eliot Hospital, and how that looks now, and again compared with your peer group.
Because I haven't got them.
Yeah, I can give you we can walk you through one at a time. And part of that is the ripple pathway. Are those numbers included in that, or are they not? If they're not, then we again would want some reassurance that people weren't being encouraged out the door for end of life, just to reduce figures.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first one is, what's the main bed blocking reasons?
Okay. We don't say bed blocking, because it's something I've had to really work with the teams on, because actually that's accusatory.
Yeah.
So you say to a patient or something, this patient is. So actually, it's usually a systemic problem. Well, it's always a systemic problem, and so mostly it's about having the right place for them to go to, and it's about finding that right place and then finding the funding.
So what's the biggest groups of those? Families unprepared to take them back, care homes unprepared to take them back, or you've got to find a whole new place for them?
Councillor, we are working on the discharge protocol now.
Yeah.
I understand that you want to know different things, but
I want to know
if I
how
can just try and put some meat on the bones and some background to this, especially for new members anyway, is I've tried for years to get this discharge protocol sorted out. The reason being, and when I say years, the council have been trying for something like 13 years to get a discharge protocol. I myself have been working, I think, for 6 years to try to get a discharge protocol. The reason being is because I didn't know, but at the time, we have had patients discharged to the town hall. So they've been discharged to the town hall from the hospital, and because it's our problem as far as they've been concerned in the past. So we can't have that. As a council, we can't have patients turning up at the town hall and us expecting to do something with them. So that's why I've been working on with trying to get this here, and that's why I'm hoping we can perhaps pick a few holes in this and work with the hospital and make sure that nobody ever comes to the town hall again, or the civic hall or whatever, sent by a taxi from the George Eliot Hospital and was expected to do with it. So they're the main sort of things that I want to get sorted tonight.
Absolutely.
But I've realised that you've got other questions, but are you prepared, are you happy to answer some of them?
I mean,
I
I'll
don't have to
answer.
do it now, Chair. I'd be happy if they just email the committee and let us know.
I'm certainly happy to answer questions. I think probably you'll get a more fulsome answer if I'm able to get some other data.
Well,
So,
yeah.
Chair, shall I just let you have these by email?
If you could let Wendy have them,
Yeah.
and then we'll get them sent out.
There's only
But
the three
all
that I
wanna
think
do-
we need to know.
All I want to do tonight is make sure that we've got a discharge protocol that where nobody gets discharged to the council, or to an home where they're not, they can't cope.
Yeah.
And so the next day they're back in hospital. That's what I want to make sure of tonight. Councillor Sergeant.
In your report, you haven't got anything written here about people who self-sign out. So they self-sign out.
Yeah.
You've still got a duty of care to the resident. So is there anything that you can do?
They'll be in this number. So the numbers that I shared about the numbers. So they get outcomed. So they are in those numbers that I gave you at the beginning. Those patients who have capacity and choose to leave us, unfortunately, it's still their choice. It may be against medical advice. But we do put in place still the normal things that we would, so we do, if we can, give them a discharge letter. I mean, obviously if they leave without taking it, then we're unable to give them that. But we do try to put in place, even if they're going against medical advice, the things that they need to keep them at home safely.
Nash?
With the surrounded patients, I know when I worked at the Eliot, a lot of the delays were caused by the social workers getting in a package or delays somewhere, but it all pointed down to the social workers. Has that improved any, or is there anything that you're trying to do to improve that?
One of the questions that I was asked was about what was one of the blocks, and one of the blocks is that availability of carers and availability of care packages, and we don't I suppose we don't actually we're not the arbiters of that. We have to just wait for a package to be available, and we can't push it until we absolutely know that the right package is in place. So that would be one of our delays. Having said that, we have social work team now who are on site. They work with us very closely, so that's a huge improvement. So they've actually got an office in our maternity building. They attend that 11 o'clock in the morning meeting, and when the ward managers come and talk about each patient. So of the 200 plus patients that are in the hospital, there is a small cohort that we are working towards getting a complex discharge on, and they help us with those on a daily basis, Monday to Friday.
So do you have, when you're doing after ward rounds and you're doing your 11 o'clock meeting, would you have like a little mini MDT team going around as well, and they can explain where they're at and what needs to be done?
So the ward manager or a representative from the ward comes and talks about those patients and what they need the help with to unplug with all the partners who are at the table. And that's really how we hopefully move that forward in a timely but a really safe way, because we need to put that rigour around it.
And I think it's probably worth saying that there's a very good strategic relationship with the Director of People at Warwickshire County Council. So there's a direct line at a very senior level if things get difficult, and the relationships are pretty good in my short experience here.
Councillor Connor.
Yeah, it almost follows on. You said Monday to Friday. How much of this protocol actually happens 7 days a week? Because if you miss being discharged on Friday, are we actually getting people stuck in the hospital then till Monday?
No, we continue to have planned discharges over the weekend, and that's how we keep the flow of the organisation working, because obviously we're still admitting patients through the weekend, so we need to keep that going. And actually for us it's a real push, but so although we don't have the same sort of meetings, we still have that push, and we certainly have the doctors reviewing the patients on a daily basis, and then the ward teams moving those patients on in their journey, whether that's the next step or whether that's actually home, it depends.
And that'll carry on through Christmas and New Year and things, because
Yeah.
obviously you rely on lots of partner organisations that can shut down.
And I think we're all well aware of that, and I would have said that when I first qualified 100 years ago, not quite, but you know, it would have all just stopped for 2 weeks. But now, actually, the partnership is such that we have that representation right the way through. It may not be on Christmas Day, but we will be working on Christmas Eve and on Boxing Day in the same way to ensure that patients can go home. I have to say Christmas Eve is our best discharging day of the year, because everybody wants to go home, and then we start to then build up again between Christmas and New Year with people coming back into us.
It is worth saying that if you look at the numbers, the number of discharges that do take place over a weekend are smaller than that during a weekday, and you can see a pattern in terms of congestion in the hospital at the beginning of the week, coming out of the weekend, improving through the week, and then falling again at the following weekend. And we're just in the process of doing a piece of work to try and understand why that is. So we wouldn't be able to say categorically that that was to do with, for example, social work availability or availability of care placements at weekend. We're just in the process of getting under those numbers to try and understand what's driving that, but there's definitely a pattern.
Just a quick follow-up on that, Chair.
No, go with the speakers.
I'm just going to ask, can you change the times of your elective stuff to actually sort of level that out?
Yeah, so we do that as a matter of routine, looking at the way that we plan elective work through the week and through peak periods of the year to try and avoid creating congestion in the hospital through poor planning.
Councillor Galway.
It was just following on from Anne's comment really, the DTOC issue, delayed transfers of care, is something that we've been working on with the Adult Health and Social Care OSC at Warwick. So we've been doing that, and actually George Eliot is better than other hospitals in the area, not necessarily in Warwick, just in Warwickshire, but in the wider area, south and north.
Oh, trust me, I'm not calling George
No,
Eliot
I'm just saying that it is something
I want
that...
to keep the George Eliot Hospital, I just want to get this right.
But it is something that is under scrutiny, and it was just with Anne bringing it up, it is something that is actively being worked on by the County Council, because they are, as you say, the arbiters of social care, and it is something that's being looked at.
Just to add to that, I think that's all about the partnership working, and I think our delayed transfers of care has come down as our partnership working has increased, and I think there's a real correlation between those two.
Yeah.
Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The discharge policy and the explanation I found very educational and encouraging, because I mean, you know, obviously we're aware of a lot of the issues around it, and it's also an opportunity to thank all the staff at the George Eliot and indeed other NHS organisations for the work they do under difficult circumstances. And I was particularly encouraged whilst there's a date of 2019 for review, that isn't just a date, you're looking at it all the time. And I've got no doubt about the quality of care in the hospitals and whatever, but the discharge thing and the care afterwards is the one that particularly gives me concern, because it's not always worked very well. Some years ago, and I guess it was particularly in relation to mental health, there was the care in the community sort of project that went ahead, and it failed a lot of times because there wasn't the support for people in the community even if it's just to make sure people are taking their medication at the correct times and to do that. So it's about that support, and not everybody's got family support around them. And it's an old chestnut of mine about, you know, oh, okay, we're going to put people at UHCW, rather than the Elliot, you know, somewhere closer. It's very difficult to get to, and if you want family support, which is part of the rehabilitation process, you know, that has to be taken account of. But I'm particularly interested in once somebody is discharged from hospital, because I know it was mentioned about age concern, but I'm interested in that link with other organisations. Macmillan are particularly good, and I know that you will be working with them, but I don't know whether there's just a little bit more info we can have on that. Just before I forget, there was something I wanted to say. We've had the report about the discharge policy, and I think most members probably share my concern about the care afterwards when people go back to their homes or wherever they're going. And it might be a good idea for this scrutiny panel to invite somebody from that sector to come and speak to you. Because one particular concern I have is respite for carers as well. Very often somebody's returned to home to their wife or husband, that's maybe the only other person that can care for them. And any provision of respite is pretty difficult. And some people, you know, it's just a constant 24-hour day caring for your partner, and that in effect wears you down eventually. And you know, I managed to help somebody to get a couple of hours respite, but that was a week, you know, and it's very difficult. All you do is time to nip up to the shops and get some of them. It's not really working out. So I think there's issues around that, and I mean, I don't know, these days we rely a lot on volunteers. I don't know what the volunteer sector is helping to contribute. I apologise, Chair, to these people here if I've sort of rambled on, but hope there's a couple of things that we can possibly respond to.
So what sorts of other agencies then, basically?
I think, I think we do quite a lot with the Mary Ann Evans Hospice. We certainly do lots with Macmillan, and quite a lot around the Ripple pathway that I described earlier. We do work with the fire service, and that's growing and becoming, you know, much more. We work with our partners within social care and within health, and I think I would echo your concerns around when patients go out of our hands, actually, you know, what's happening and what's there to maintain that safe and wellness at home. I do think that we have to remember that a lot of people have capacity and can make their own decisions, and so we have to respect that, even if we don't. Sometimes as nurses, because we have a little tendency to be a little bit, you know, sort of rather than apple pie, and we want them to be as good as we can get them, and so we have to respect their own decisions sometimes, even if they're unwise.
Okay, Councillor Ricken.
Yeah, thank you for this. It's been very informative. You spoke about the discharge process and times. Is there a time when you wouldn't discharge a patient? I actually work in the care sector, and I've known it in the past when they have been discharged late at night and in very late at night and early hours of the morning.
Yeah, and I think we very much understand that that's the wrong thing to do, and we feel very strongly that it should be done within proper hours. But sometimes, actually, the person who wants to make the choices makes the choices, or we are hamstrung with transport, particularly if we're relying on external people to help us with that transport. So I can't say it never happens, and I can't say it's never sort of, you know, a bit concerning. But actually, you know, we try to bring that into the more reasonable hours of the day. And that's part of the good service that the fire and rescue are offering us, because they're taking patients out of ED and they are settling them at home and actually making sure that they're, you know, that there's food in the fridge and the heating's on and that, you know, the electricity works and that sort of thing. So actually for us that's a safer discharge if it's at a slightly later time, or somebody who hasn't got somebody else at home to greet them when they get there.
Following on from Councillor Rudkin, do your consultants still only discharge from Monday to Friday, or are they? Is anyone able to discharge over the weekend, like the on-call registrar or somebody like that?
Absolutely. So we actually have a team who focus on discharge at the weekend. So our consultants lead it in the week, and then at the weekend we identify a list of patients who are potentially able to be discharged over the weekend, and we have a specific discharging team led by either a consultant or a registrar who go around and reassess those patients and see. There is the other piece of the jigsaw, which is the nurse-led discharge. So if a decision and a plan has been written to say if X, Y and Z has happened, this patient can go home, then the nurses can actually do that discharge. So we do quite a lot about making sure that can still happen, because I think if you're sitting in the hospital on Saturday and you know that you can't go home to Monday because nobody will make a decision, it's really frustrating. And we have to always remember that at the other end of the pipeline there are people in ED waiting for a bed, and that's how we keep that flow going.
That's a big improvement.
Yeah. We're getting there.
Yeah.
Councillor
Thanks, Chair. I have submitted those emails to you and to Wendy. I wonder if we could just ask George Elliott when we're likely to get a response to the questions. A couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, if you get them to us tomorrow, we'll respond within 2 weeks.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
I guess, sorry, one of the points you raised was about mortality rates. We'll make you an offer to come and talk to you about mortality rates. We'll get our medical director to come and have that conversation with you.
I think that's already done anyway.
Can I just say that you mentioned about patients who were discharged to the council offices, and I have been at the George Elliott for some years now, and I have heard of that in the past. We have done lots of partnership working with a lot of the homeless charities and with housing, and so we actually have a much closer relationship now, and through that, so we actually now have a process where people who are homeless, we actually can start a process to identify a safe place for them to go, and so there isn't this risk of them being put in a taxi to the council office, which was a previous practice, which I have to say I hope has never happened while I've been there, because I just think that is not acceptable. But we do a lot of that work, and particularly because I'm the safeguarding lead for the organisation, so from my point of view, that's just not going to happen. So
well, like I say, that's what brought it to my attention.
Absolutely.
Working with housing, and that's what brought it to my attention, which going back to Kevin McGee's time, we had set up a meeting and we've just got nowhere. But, told Wendy I did want this off because it's been on for years. So just going through your report, collaborative planning with patient, families and carers. So you sort of preempted it there. I was going to ask what have you done with this council and also our heart team?
Yeah, well, it's the heart team that we work with around. Yeah, absolutely. And the lead for the heart team has presented to our discharge liaison nurses, so that they've got that link, so they now know each other, and they can so it's around that emergency housing and long-term placements.
Right, so your link with the Borough Council is through the heart team. Okay, brilliant. Discharge policy approved June 27. But again, who was that shared with, or did you work with the heart team on doing this discharge protocol, discharge policy?
The discharge policy is the internal policy.
Right.
So it's that's what tells our staff what our policy is and how they are expected to do it. We did the consultation with our partners. I can't say whether or not the heart team were involved, because at the time I was actually working for a different organisation. so I can check that out and I can make
No,
sure that it reflects. But my understanding is that it absolutely reflects the process now for homelessness, because was the big issue that you know, we were worried about.
It was homelessness and also working with the local authority, really. That's where, for me, as a representative of the council, I want to see that the council is involved with the local hospital. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's probably worth saying that in terms of working together, there's a local A&E delivery group, which is a multi-agency group, and it's probably worth just referring back to the terms of reference and checking that we've got the right people around the table.
Yeah.
So we'll undertake to do that and go back to the ranch.
That's all I'm asking for, really, to be honest. I don't really know if this is worth. It's about the report. Yeah, when you do get people into your A&E, and they get discharged from A&E, if they was to come in with a stab wound or something like that, do you report that to the police, or is that's not possible with GDPR or something? Is that about right?
Well, it falls into our safeguarding. So if somebody came in reporting something that I felt or the team felt was either a risk to them or a risk to someone who's in their home, so we find out, have they got young children, have they got somebody with them, you know, all of that sort of thing. So there are times that we can disclose, and we do disclose, but the majority of the time it has to be that the patient has to feel safe to come and so we do, but it wouldn't be that every time somebody comes in with a stab wound or stab wound, that happens very rarely. We're not a trauma centre.
I would just use that for an example.
If it was something like we suspected domestic violence, or we suspected that, we would talk to the person and ask them if we could disclose. But if we felt that their life was in danger, then we would intervene.
It's just that I know that in the past, going back to the reporting of crime sort of thing, because it is working closely together. It would have helped us send our police in the right direction, so that all concentrated on certain crimes if we'd have had better cooperation with the hospital.
From our perspective in terms of community safety, I think I've emailed you about this previously.
I think I've written.
Yeah, you have, yeah. In other areas of the county, so Borough Hospital, as an example, they provide locations of where violent crime happens. So, for instance, if it kind of actually happens outside a particular night, they're able to use that evidence when they look at our meetings for licensing. So, for Nuneaton and Bedworth, we've kind of had data at some point, but actually it's not a systematic thing that we get anymore. We would find it really helpful from a community safety perspective to be able to have that map in.
So we might not be the right people to help you with that, but we can certainly have a conversation about sort of navigating the system to get to that. And certainly from an information point of view, there's no problem with us sharing anonymised information. Sort of types of incidents and force call. The ambulance service law might have better information in terms of incident location and things. So happy to have a conversation offline with each other.
Okay. Like I say, I didn't know where that was, but you do discharge it from so.
I think the other thing to say is the vast majority of those patients, particularly those conveyed by ambulance, will not come to us. They'll go to the UHCW because they're likely to trigger the trauma tool that's used to assess where a patient would go for the right sort of care.
Okay, so...
Just a quick one. What percentage of discharges are readmitted, and do you do any analysis on the reasons that they are readmitted?
I couldn't tell you the exact figure, but that was one of your questions. So we'll get you that data, and I'll get them to do key themes for you so that you know. But we do look at why patients have been readmitted, and you know, how we can try and avoid that.
Any more? No. Okay then, so if everybody's happy with the discharge protocol, then we can turn it off.
Yes.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. But,
Our work here is done.
well, we're here, thank you. Yeah, okay, well, thanks for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate it. Okay, moving on. Addressing teen conception. Over to, right, so Rachel will be giving you a report, but the person who's supposed to be giving the report turned up. So, see what...
Well, we did get apologies beforehand.
Well, we did, but it still hasn't turned up. So, so Rachel will try and answer any of your questions, but if not, we'll get back to you with any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. So firstly, as Councillor Watkins mentioned, the report's brought to you in relation to teen conception levels within the borough, and the approach, I'll outline the approach that we've taken with our partners. So apologies from Etty Martin. Etty Martin is one of the Sexual Health Commissioners for Warwickshire. She is one of the lead officers who commission services around relationship, sex education work across the county, and also public health. So we've worked really closely with public health to look at teen conception levels as well. So we've had apologies from Rachel Robinson, who's one of the deputy directors of public health. So the information that you've got here really gives you an overview of the work that we've been doing collectively as a partnership. And it's born from some results that came out of the ONS data back in 2016. And because of the delay in terms of getting the data, what we've got in 2016 was some figures from 2014 that you've got in Appendix B. And if I just give you an overview of those, in terms of rates per 1,000 population for under 18 women, in Nuneaton and Bedworth, there were 43 women per 1,000 of the population who fitted into the category of under 18 teen conception rates. For Warwickshire, that compared to 22.9, and then for England and Wales it was 22.8. So you can see we're significantly above the county-wide and the regional average for that. If we skip 2015 and move to 2016, you'll see that there's actually been a decrease in the rate. So that's really positive. We're really pleased with that. We still continue to kind of, we've still got an issue. We've still got some way to go. However, it's on our radar and we're working with the right people to try and address it. But just to tell you a little bit about the work that we've done as a partnership, back in 2016, towards the latter end of that year, we held a summit with a range of partners. I think some of you around this table were actually at that meeting. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to identify why the level of teen conception was so high. We wanted to look at how we could prevent it from increasing in the future. And what we also wanted to do was come out with something tangible. So people were coming along, we wanted them to each give a unique contribution and a pledge to kind of addressing it. So looking at the looking at the why was the level so high? There are several reasons that could be considered, but actually there's no tangible one reason. Some people cited that it might have been due to reductions in funding, like budgets for youth provision, youth services. Some thought it might have been due to PSHE sessions within schools kind of reducing and not being as big a priority as they used to be. Some thought it might be aspirational in terms of aspirations of young people and kind of, reciprocating, the ongoing kind of issues that their families may have had before them and thinking that was okay and, that was what they wanted to do. So we kind of looked at all of those. And then we developed, we asked everyone for a pledge. And the pledges here under 3.5 were around service development. So what services do you want to develop? How do you want to improve them? Partnership working. So actually collectively we all wanted to do something to address this issue. Education, so this was around education within communities, it was within education within schools. And then the fourth thing was around supporting young people. What is it that young people are asking for to be able to address this issue? Moving on from that, we set up, it's called an ATC group, we've still got it, Addressing Teen Conception Group. It's shared with North Warwickshire because Atherstone also have booked the trend. Atherstone themselves have got a significant high teen conception rate. So jointly with North Warwickshire, we've set up a dressing team conception group, and you'll see under 3.6 there are a whole range of agencies that participate within it. So we've got community midwives, we've got NHS pharmacy representatives, public health, Warwickshire County Council, RSE services, Barnardo's, Murray Stopes. That list isn't exhaustive, there are other people that are part of that. And we've also got really good buy-in from Public Health England. So we've got somebody from Public Health England who's working with us on the work that we're trying to do. So that initial summit and the action plan that came from that, we did a review in June of this year, we fulfilled all of the pledges that were in there, which was brilliant, which was really good. And what I've kind of highlighted some of the notable successes here. The first one was that the Health Store Fund, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Health Store at Hatterspace. So Health Store provides a service. It was funded through Warwickshire County Council's Education Service. They provide a service to younger people around contraception, advice, relationship advice, etc. We'd realised in 2016 that the funding for that service was being removed. And obviously at a time where we've got really high teen conception rates, it wasn't the best thing to happen. So until 2020, we've entered into an arrangement with so MBBC, Warwickshire County Council, North Warwickshire Borough Council and Warwickshire Public Health, have all contributed an amount to enabling this service to continue. So at the moment it will run until March 2020. We need to obviously work on, and that's within the action plan, the new action plan, we need to work on mainstreaming that funding one way or another. But we've made a commitment to do it until 2020. There's also been an increase in pharmacists providing emergency contraceptive advice. This is the emergency hormone pill kind of thing. And you'll see here there's 21 pharmacies across the area that now provide that, which is really good. Introduction of a C card. So this again is about giving and distributing condoms across to young people. So the C card was launched in July 2017. It's aimed at 13 to 25-year-olds. And the idea is that they can go to any pharmacy it's got like a purple sticker that says something, and if they go with their card, they will be able to get free contraception-free condoms. Another notable success, probably the most profound one, is that the teen conception level actually reduced. So we were 43 per thousand, as I've mentioned. In 2000, the most recent figures that we've got shows that it's down to 29.8, which we feel is good. It's not brilliant, but actually it's much better than it was initially. And then nationally, because we've got Public Health England working with us, it's enabled us to conduct a self-assessment. So they have produced what's called a self-assessment toolkit to address teen conception. So working with the people in the ATC group, we've been able to go through the self-assessment, look at areas which we need to continue to develop. They have held us up as national good practice, the work that we're doing and the involvement and the kind of engagement that we've got. And what I can do, I asked for permission today to see if I could share the self-assessment with you. And I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. It's work in progress, but I'll make sure after this meeting that you've got a copy of it, just so that you can refer back to it for your notes. So in conclusion, since the summit, there's been notable successes in there. We've still got a way to go. We still want to continue to kind of support our young people. You know, there are safeguarding issues here, there are aspirational issues here, and we really want to work together to continue to reduce it.
Right, so over to everybody here.
I'll try and answer your questions, but I may not be.
Councillor here.
Thanks. You said the Hatterspace has been funded till March 2020. It says 2019 here on page 23. So page 23.
On page 23.
Oh, that's the
That's the C card.
That's the C card.
That's C card.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
That's the condom distribution scheme.
Okay, so this is funded until March 2019?
Yes.
Might that
So
be
it's
extended?
Yes. It's a pilot. They're looking at how successful it is. But yeah, the intention is that if funding's available and it is successful, it was something that we'd like to see continue. But But again, we don't commission that service, so we can only say actually we feel it's really important that this is provided. If the providers of that service don't deem it, other than kind of stating our interest in it, there's not really a lot that we can do, unfortunately.
Do you know who funds it? Sorry. Go on.
I would be quite surprised if it is successful, because I've had a look today at where you can get it from. You can get it from the health store, which is open just in the evenings, and 2 places in Camp Hill. That's it, 3 places, according to what I've got today. Whereas I looked at other places, and they went on for pages and pages.
I've got 6 pharmacy locations.
It's not on the website as
Okay,
of today.
I could feed that back.
So,
I mean, as I said, we as a council, we're not responsible for providing the service, so I don't know the exact details of what it looks like. But I can, if you've got any queries, I can relay them back.
So are there 6 in Atherstone? Are you including Atherstone in that? Because I was just looking at Nuneaton.
I'm going on the details that have been given to me. I can check the locations and give you them.
Yeah, it just seems very small compared to other areas where
Yeah.
their lists went on for pages and pages, and it says hundreds of venues here, but you've just said 6.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I would be surprised if it's as successful as we would hope it to be. And just lastly, the rates have gone down. Anecdotally, at the college that I work at with 1,200 students, the PSHE service is very, very much reduced. Lots of students come to us having had no kind of sex education in schools whatsoever. Our service is very much reduced to how it used to be, and compared to past, we're having a lot more pregnancies than we've had in the past. So far, in the last 12 months, we've had approximately 18, which is massively up on
And then
what it used to be. We're a sixth form college.
Do they stay on at college, do you know, or do they drop out? What's the impact of that?
That's the pregnancy rate, not necessarily the go on to have births, but those do drop out, and some of them come back
So do you feel then that because of the reduction in PSHE kind of support there, that it's having an impact?
That's how it feels,
Yeah,
and
okay.
trying to get them to sign up for this card is it's very difficult for them to go off to Hatter's Space when they don't live in Nuneaton, might live in Bedworth, and it's only open in the evenings in Nuneaton.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll find this exact opening times for you. I know that they were looking at providing an outreach service in Bedworth, because we'd looked at the figures in terms of take-up of service across the borough in terms of wards, and we had queried Bedworth. So I will relay that back, but I'll also pick up your point on your anecdotal kind of experience at the college, if that's okay, and I'll mention that when we meet next in our group.
Yeah, so if the website's updated, so we've got all the information on
Yeah.
there, that would be a start.
No problem.
Okay, so I think the thing to remember is that there is very little we can do as a borough council. But although it's really important to our residents, it's very little as a borough council we can do. Councillor Sergeant.
I'm hopefully going to word this correctly, because I don't want to come across as though I'm going to word it incorrectly. I've been trying to think how to put it, so I'm just going to say it. Obviously all the statistics are here, and everything under 18, for every woman, I don't want to age it, but the reality is probably 17, it doesn't mean it's an unwanted pregnancy.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I'm not saying that I agree or I disagree, but that is real. So the statistics here are, as they are falling, is it because there is still wanted pregnancies in that? Because there isn't anywhere that tells us what is a wanted pregnancy and what is an unwanted pregnancy. And I don't
know if there's any data that would say that. I suppose the only way of doing it would be able to look at the conception rates and then look at the live birth rates just to compare the difference, but I don't know how easy that is to get the information. I mean, I can ask.
And I don't think I've got a viewpoint on it, but the reality
Yes,
is, I think
yeah,
when you're
yeah.
looking at data, it's very easy to say that's that, but you
I
know,
think the other thing is you slip into assuming that because people have children at that age, it's a really bad thing, and actually, you know, it's.
when
it
I was a young mum,
Yes.
and
yeah.
the nurses said to me that it was easier because it was like I'd gone from a young mum to looking after a doll, which wasn't the truth at all.
Yeah,
But the reality is that it doesn't necessarily mean the older you are, the better mum you are.
Yes.
And I think within statistics we've got to be very careful that we're not judging
Yeah.
everybody under 18 exactly the same, because I think that's incorrect.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Can I just respond to that with the statistics we had at the last OSC on?
Well, I'm
on it?
wary at times, so.
Because it said there was a massive correlation with under 18 births and lifetime poverty. So it's not that much of a good thing to be welcome.
I'm not saying I had a viewpoint on it, I'm just saying I think when you're
just-
looking at statistics, it would be interesting to see how many wanted pregnancies were.
I'll ask if we can have details of conception and live births, and then I can circulate it to you.
Okay. Councillor Golby?
Just to help you out a bit, the clinics that are open are, I mean, I did a quick Google I just put in free condoms, Nuneaton. It's not difficult. Most teenagers know their way around Google. So you've got sexual health clinic in Nuneaton at the George Eliot. You've got the contraception service at Riversley Park on Clinic Drive. Hatter's Space. There's one Ramsden Avenue, Camp Hill. Chat, North Warwickshire, which is the student centre at Hinckley Road. That's at the college itself. The community contraception service in Bedworth, and then they move on to slightly further afield in Holbrook. So we have got a fairly decent spread, and in places where you may find young people like the college. So I think there is a reasonable coverage of where you can get free condoms from, as well as on top of the C card scheme that's going on. And again, with something that Councillor Elliott said about lifetime poverty and young teenage pregnancies, this has been brought up again at the OSC that I sit on at County Council. The Director of Public Health, John Linan, gave us a presentation on everything. And the highest rates of teenage pregnancy within Nuneaton Bedworth is actually Camp Hill. So it's a cause and effect. Is it because of poverty, or is it poverty because of teenage pregnancies? You could argue that chicken and egg scenario round and round. But we've also got other issues in Camp Hill through public health reporting, highest rates of smoking in pregnancy, highest rates of unemployment, lower educational attainment, again, within that area. And we're also spending a lot of money in Camp Hill to cover lots of different aspects of those things.
Just keep it.
Yeah, but it all kind of interlinks. So again, funding's great, but is it being spent in the right way? And is it effective when it is being spent? If we've got so many social problems in an area where we are spending money, maybe we need to look at what we're spending the money on and what the outcomes are overall, not just in siloed teenage pregnancies, smoking pregnancies. That's something that maybe we could look at.
Yeah, nobody's got the answer, are they?
No, not at all.
I mean, everybody will blame education. Everybody, all the time. It's education because you're obese.
But it's also personal
because you're
choice.
pregnant, it's education.
It's also
because
personal
it's
choice as well.
It's education because you're eating wrong. There's all sorts.
But
So,
there
yeah.
is an element of personal choice in that.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
choice to wear a condom.
Definitely, yeah. Councillor Trevor.
Thank you. Yeah, I looked at this report and it told me a couple of things. First of all, that under 16s very welcome drop between 15 and 16. Under 18s a big increase. So the real trouble there isn't the under 16s anymore. It is the 16 to 18-year-olds, and that's where everything needs to be focused. And it's very interesting what Councillor Elliott said, that actually their experience is it is that group, the over 16s but under 18s. That are experiencing that rise even now, and that couples on to the other thing that's missing, which is this is quite old data. we've got nothing for last year or this year or whatever.
But that's because it's historical.
Yeah, and Councillor Elliott's been able to give us some anecdotal for recently, and you know, I've got to say, you know, it's all happening at kegs. It wasn't like that in my day, I can assure you. You know. And maybe if they're giving out the free condoms at the tech, maybe it's as simple that if the tech's rates are, if the tech isn't seeing the same kind of level of teenage, you know, plus 16 under 18 pregnancy, maybe dish out the free condoms at...
There is no funding. It's being asked and asked. There is no funding for us to have this.
Whoever's doing it at the tech, you know, I shouldn't think the tech are paying for that. Whoever's doing it there, maybe ask if they could also do it at your place, because that might be as simple as that.
The questions have been asked.
But what we've got to do is keep it real of what we can do as a Borough Council. We are open Borough Council here.
And I think
we haven't got no funding or anything,
no,
anything like this.
And what we need to do is recognise where the issue is, and the issue isn't under 16s anymore. It's 16 to 18.
And from this report, we can perhaps ask Rachel Robinson to look at some things like that. So that's what I wanted to come out of tonight, is whatever you see wrong in here or wherever, then we need to ask Rachel Robinson to look at, perhaps giving cakes or whatever.
Yeah. I've got a couple of things. I've got condom pharmacy location queries, so we'll find out. I've got PSH in the college and the impact that you feel it's having now, and to do some work and build some bridges there. Conception rates compared to live births, and then to send you the self-assessment tool as well.
Yeah. Councillor Sergeant, did you?
It was just adding on to what other people had said. Really, just as you know, I think the figure should be, if we can find some figures on. You know, one of the things that in my past is that my first wife, if you like, we did have a child under 18. My wife was under 18. And, you know, I look at what's written there and think to myself, that looks like this kind of, you know, stigmatising that sort of thing. And I think if we can pull out the figures that, you know, if that was an actual planned pregnancy, and you know, she's turned out all right. She's a nurse. We've got 2 grandchildren. She's teaching at Coventry University, and she was born into poverty. We didn't have any money. I had to work 6-7 days a week sometimes to make ends meet. But I'd done it, and she turned out okay. So what I would want to know is you know, within them figures, are there, you know, people that have, you know, I know it's kids having kids, etc., but you know, we planned that. And it's turned out okay. I'm not saying everybody will, but we turned out okay. The other thing to mention is, when I was at school, I never got any sexual health teaching at all. We certainly never got free condoms. I didn't know what one was until I was about 22.
On that point, Chair,
apart from putting it on my head and blowing it up.
I think the definition is, because these are just about conceptions, aren't they? If we just had the data on unplanned pregnancies and stripped out the planned ones, because the health service, your GP or whoever you go to, as I understand it, always asks from a welfare point of view, is this a planned pregnancy? So the data's captured somewhere.
Yeah, hold on. We've got other speakers. Let's get through the speakers. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, there's a number of positives within this report. You know, we have to be careful that we don't sort of pick things apart too much. And of course, the data that's there is old data, but that's the nature of how a lot of how things are reported. But let's remember that, you know, pregnancies, particularly unplanned ones, and to young people, have a major impact on lots of other areas, not only of their lives, but other sections within the community and all of the sorts of agencies. Having said that, some of the information we've got tonight is encouraging. There's certainly some areas that we need further improvement on. But what we can't be, although it's encouraging, is be complacent. And people have mentioned about education, and I'm not talking about education in the sense of what you get taught at school, but about positive public health promotion. And that's kind of fell away over recent years on a number of areas, including this, I have to say. and certainly in, and again, certainly in the area around AIDS and HIV, there was massive public promotion about dealing with that, and it really worked. But now, since it fell away, it's coming up, it's building up again. The thing that concerns me is you get the likes of us sitting around a table, we have a bit of a chinwag and everything, but where does anything go then? What you need is something positive to come out from our meetings. And I know that the recommendation says that we note the report. I actually don't think that's enough on a number of occasions. And I think we could take the opportunity as a scrutiny panel tonight to make sure that our views are expressed to all of these agencies, particularly involved in that focus group, but with the county council and public health people, about how we need to have continuous investments, sustainable investment in places like Hatters Court, and there certainly seems to be a discrepancy in any provision in the Bedworth end of the borough, which needs improving. And also, I think Rachel said that the C-card project was a pilot project, yeah. And I think we should encourage that to be rolled out in all areas of the borough as well. It's for this scrutiny panel that I'm not a regular member of to decide on, but I think rather than just note the report, let's try and be positive and encourage people to keep putting the much needed investment, if you like, into this area of public health.
I think you're right. I think that's what needs to come out of this, is we need to let other agencies know that we still do have a problem and we would like this and this to come out of this. And not just know that. Well, you know, if somebody wants to recommend that, we'll go for it. No. Councillor Concord.
Right, yeah, it's really interesting data, but it's a bit all over the place because obviously we've got lots of data sources. One of the key things is this is conception data. Births happen 9 months later, roughly. So I assume these are ages at the date of conception. So some of these 17-year-old conceptions will be 18-year-old births. So I think actually getting more data would be useful in terms of single year data, because obviously a positive story could be that people having children at 17 a few years ago were having children at 15 and 16. So it could be actually people are making positive decisions to have children and actually having them a couple of years later. So I think a bit more data would be useful in terms of when the births are cut, birth data for these people in the teens, not just 15, 16, 17, but also the 18s, because obviously the people having births at 18, half of them will be conceived at 17. And I think it is useful for the council to look at a broad picture of data, because although we don't have funding, if we notice different things happen to the people going to Tech, to the people going to Eton, to the people living in Camp Hill, to the people living in Kingswood, or areas with similar demographics, we can actually ask the question, what actually is helping? And one of the things that has been blamed for reducing birth rates for teenagers has been the internet, Facebook, and people having things just to keep themselves busy. Is the problem in Camp Hill in part boredom? They're very disconnected.
You don't have the internet in Camp Hill. Not got Facebook up there.
No, but just in terms of the things that people would actually keep them occupied, and also the safeguarding issue of keeping them safe. So I don't know where we are with those issues. But I think it's very important to understand the issues, get reasonable data, and although they do have internet in Camp Hill, they don't have a cinema.
Oh, we've got a cinema. Councillor Daffy.
So this is something quite close to my heart, so echoing things that Jane said. My mum was 17 when she had me, so I'm in no way going to be critical of your mothers. I think it's a separate issue, isn't it? We've got to take it as a separate issue. Obviously it's positive that we're seeing a downward trend. I'd also agree with what Councillor Elliott's saying about PSHE education. I teach in a secondary school. A lot of kids are coming to us in year 10 and 11. I'm in Coventry, so it's a bit it's not as local. But kids are coming to us in year 10 and 11 and just don't know about contraception at all. And I'd say at that point it's probably a bit late for some of those. And it's kind of educating them about the basics and about conception and what's involved in that in the first instance. What I'd like to know is what services are doing in regards to informing and educating in schools, not just through PSHE provision, but just general information about contraception, not just condoms, because there's many other forms of contraception that I'd say it's more useful to be informing students about, because I don't think they know, and I think that's a massive problem. I would praise the services locally. I've accessed the services obviously part myself as a young person, and I've always found them quite supportive, and I know a lot of people that I know have similar experiences of services around the town. I think this is probably a more important issue now, because I think there's a lot of trouble around waiting time determinations, and I think this is quite a traumatic process for kind of prospective young parents, and I can think of examples of people waiting kind of 10 weeks plus for terminations when they're under the age of 18, which is quite traumatic. So I'd personally like to know what services are doing in education, in schools and colleges, so not just kind of things like the C card, but just information generally about different types of contraceptives and what's available to them and where those services are. So obviously we've got Google, but somebody's already got to be actively looking for those services to kind of know about them. Whereas actually if we're being more proactive with that, I think it probably could be tackled a little bit earlier maybe.
Okay, so if I send out the self-assessment, there should be details in there that will answer some of those questions, particularly around education. Within Etty's team, she does have somebody that she commissions to go to schools and education providers to provide the kind of PSHE awareness. Sometimes the issue isn't. Sometimes the issue is actually the school accepting it. So you can offer it, but not necessarily the schools might not necessarily take it up. And I know a couple of years ago, this OSP, sorry, it was the predecessor to this, so it was like the old health OSP. Had a working party around this, and I think they called school governors in and wrote to school governors and said, you need to kind of do more here. So you can actually offer it, but the schools have got to be prepared to take it up. And if you are all, so you've got to remember, this is one issue out of hundreds of issues that we want young people to be aware of. What's happening is we're all competing for that same slot within the school, alongside all of the others, and if it's not a priority for that school, they're not going to. Sorry. Did you?
No.
The ladies.
Yeah.
I've
got that.
All right.
Well, one mother was at the other end of the scale. She was 41 when she had others in between. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. In panel 4 of the report here, we've got notable successes, and we've heard about how the C card is a pilot project run by other people, going to be reviewed. They'll obviously have evidence to review that with. Do we have evidence to point to the effectiveness of, or otherwise, of A and B in this list?
Yeah, so I can definitely answer on the health store. We're looking at the number of people that come through the door. Because we're one of the funders, we get a kind of an overview of what's happening. So what we want is people to come through those doors. We want to see an increase in the baseline of what there was initially. And we also want to, like I can't remember who mentioned Bedworth, but if there's a low uptake in a particular area, which in Bedworth there has been, we're asking questions of, well, what are you doing about the people in Bedworth? Because obviously we need a service to people who are wide. We don't want it just the people who live.
But recording how many people come through the door doesn't record how effective it is. It's like recording how many people go to a pub doesn't tell you how many drinks they buy.
No, but I guess the outcome will be whether the teen conception levels kind of alter or not. But it's a bit dangerous to say actually the health source is responsible solely for the fluctuations in that. So it's a chicken and egg. If you think it's an important service, it would be provided. If you think, well, actually it's difficult to see the effect, then it obviously won't be provided. I think for us as a council, in particular, our portfolio holder is very keen to make this happen.
I'm not suggesting that we apply that sort of value judgment. I'm just asking if the evidence exists. It would be useful to see that.
Okay. I mean, what I could do is, I'm just thinking about the numbers. Sometimes the numbers on the data are quite small, so I might not be able to share them because it's easy to identify the people.
Okay.
But let me have a look at a way that I might be able to explain it to you in terms of the success or not. I believe it is successful, but let me have a look at a way of kind of being able to communicate that to you.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay.
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I was a member of the working group, so I can actually back up what Rachel has just said. But the other thing that the working group followed up on was a letter was sent to Justine Greening in terms of having sexual education in school. And as Rachel said, the outcome of that was that there is that much pressure within schools these days that no more time could be allocated to sexual education. So that was a losing battle, really. But the effort was put in by the working group to follow that up with Justine Greening.
It's just looking at one tool, a range of tools, isn't it, to address the same, the issue. So it's like, well, if there's an education issue, a service issue, like I said here, that the kind of the partnership plan is around several different themes. We can't just look at it in isolation. Go, actually, it's education, or it's like a service over here. It's holistically what are affecting the kind of the opportunities for young people.
That's a goal.
We seem to be among friends on that. I was a child of a teenage pregnancy also. So it's like being in the AA, isn't it? And I was brought up in serious poverty for quite a number of years of my life, actually. I was brought up in a council flat in a high-rise block in Salford that was eventually demolished because it was unfit for human habitation. So it wasn't the best of places, but here I am. And something that I think is missing is we don't know how many live births there are. We know the conception rates, but what are the live birth rates? Can we add that to the list? Because I think that would be quite interesting to sort of then break down the live birth demographic into what we've all been saying, what was a planned pregnancy and what was an unplanned pregnancy, because there's no point in trying to tackle people to reduce pregnancy if they actually want the baby, if the baby is planned. You're wasting your resources and your time to focus on the people who have live births and who are unplanned pregnancies. I think those are the two things that we need to look at, which is slightly more of a drill down into the information that we've been given here, which is just conception rates. So I think to have a more focused approach, it would be a better thing all over.
Right. Okay. Right. So as chair, bring you back to reality now. This is that members note the report. There's been no recommendations, so if we just note the report, you will never see this again.
I'm sorry, I thought that's what I was doing, Chair.
Okay, so
I mean,
you just got more recommendations again.
Well,
so do you want to see it in 12 months, 6 months?
It was basically that we, as a scrutiny panel, that we want our concerns put across the relevant agencies and to be able to make these projects sustainable and really to encourage that they're funded for the future, because with the Hatters Space one, 2020 isn't very far away.
So do you want to see this in 6 months, 12 months?
Chair, I have just to Councillor Hancock's point, I've just emailed you and Rachel and said, actually, following on from what we were saying and talking about here, can Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council or you as chair of the OSB write to whoever it is that she's out there, free condoms out there, and tech and say, please do it at kegs. And then if all else fails, if they won't do that, can we, because we obviously run the thing at Hatter Space, can we ask Kegs to dish out supply and the tech and anyone else that's 16 to 18-year-olds leaflets about Hatter Space?
Okay, I
That'd
appreciate,
be two
I
things
appreciate
we
what
could
you're
do.
saying, but because I've been picked up in the past of not getting votes and everything, there'll be a recommendation, there'll be a seconder, and there'll be votes to say that yes, that's what's good.
Can I move that
and
we
there'll
do
be a
that?
show of hands for the camera.
I'll second that recommendation.
So your recommendations are that we ask for the
I don't
agencies.
think there's anything to argue about really.
No, and I'm not trying to. I just want to make sure that it's seconded and voted on for the camera.
But what I'm saying, Chair, is there are more issues than that. There was the stuff about making sure that funding is available for the future to make sure these services continue. And I'm sure between yourself and Rachel, you can pick out the relevant points that members around the room have made.
So shall I move
but
that then?
what I'm saying, Chair, is we shouldn't be sitting around here talking about something and noting something. We should be making representations to whoever, our portfolio holder, Warwickshire County Council and the other agencies, Public Health and all the others.
Okay, so if you're happy for me to do that as chair and you're not going to bring me back to here, say, well, we never voted on it, we never seconded it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Voting for it.
Councillor Concourt.
At one point, I would like the data on live births and that, if it's coming back in 6 months or whatever.
Would you just said that?
Yeah.
Councillor Sargent.
No, I'm just voting on it.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Could Rachel just read out the information that she's got to bring back?
Yeah, so I've got condom pharmacy locations, query-wise there are so few. PSHE, college pregnancies, there's an issue there, to relay that back. Why aren't they getting the information and the kind of condoms that you've mentioned? Update the website, that you asked for the website to be looked at and updated. Conceptions compared to, so the number of conceptions compared to live births, number of wanted and planned, is there any detail there? To send the self-assessment, to relay the views to the Addressing Teen Conception Group around, I think that's what Councillor Hancock has alluded to, which was needing sustainable support for services going ahead. Can I get birthday data, e.g. if the conception happens maybe at 17 years and 11 months, does that count within these figures or in post-18 figures? Provision of support offered, no sorry that's a different one, health store outcomes and success.
So if we put a motion together to support everything that Rachel's just said, then it's all pretty much covered, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're also going to send those two letters as well.
I'll work with Rachel and I'll put something together.
So,
and we'll see it within.
I think it's about going back to the ATC group, the actual group that looks at this.
Yeah.
And then for that group to then come back. So Betty, if you ask, I mean, I'm here as a kind of a communicator. She knows the services inside out better than I do. Is perhaps to ask her to come back and give an update on all of those things and what the group's been doing over the next 6 months.
Yeah, but it's just as a warning really, because if you don't ask for it to come back, it don't come back.
No, that's right.
So always make sure you ask for something.
And then,
Put a date on. Can we put a date time on that? Is that
A date.
12.
12? You're doing 12 months?
That's what it said, 12 months.
Within 12 months?
Yeah.
Right, okay, brilliant.
And then
The next one is gambling and its impact on health and well-being. And as you see, just lately it's had a lot of press and things. This is something that I have wanted to bring for a long time because there is much deeper things than you might think into this. But again, Rachel, over to you.
Okay. So the report comes with a literal health warning in that it isn't anything that we've looked at previously that the council is not a priority for health and wellbeing, and there is no local data. And I'll take you through in more detail what data is available. So I've tried to put a definition in terms of what gambling is. I'm assuming that most of you are aware of what gambling is. There's a definition here from the BMA just to put it into context. The Gambling Commission website, again, just in terms of kind of adding some kind of background to this, highlights, and these are figures from 2018 in November, that 45% of people have gambled in the past 4 weeks, 48% of men have gambled in the past 4 weeks, lower rate for women, and 18% of people have gambled online in the past 4 weeks. So it's kind of almost like half of the population, according to the Gambling Commission, are gambling. It goes on to explain gambling behaviour, that 97% of online gamblers gamble at home, 50% gamble using a laptop, 51% via a mobile phone or tablet, and then 0.8, so less than 1% identify themselves as problem gamblers. The British Gambling Prevalence Survey highlights some of the reasons why people gamble. Some of it's excitement, enhancement, social, coping with military, and coping and military reasons. A lot of people obviously want to win big money, so 83% of people think, yes, we want to get big bucks. People think it's exciting. Now, in terms of the effect on health and wellbeing, which is kind of what Councillor Watkins had asked me to kind of bring some data and detail around it. Unfortunately, locally, there is no data for Nuneaton and Bedworth. There isn't any for Warwickshire either. However, having said that, there are so many national examples of where gambling and its effect on broader than health and wellbeing, the whole lifestyle of people is available. So I included a paper that was circulated to local authorities back in February, again from the Gambling Commission, and it highlighted that there's often issues that present alongside health and wellbeing problems around financial difficulty, debt, bankruptcy, relationship issues, lost productivity within the workplace, crime, theft and fraud, depression, stress, anxiety. There's a whole list there that are fit for you to see. More recently, again, the Gambling Commission have conducted a recent survey, and that has been around young people and gambling, and it's focused on 11 to 16-year-olds. And what they've said is, in terms of kind of risky behaviour, there are more young people of that age participating in gambling than are drinking alcohol or smoking. So they estimate that 14% of 11 to 16-year-olds in the UK spend money on gambling, which equates to 450,000 young people within the UK who have been involved in that. Furthermore, the consultancy agency Reed Employment conducted a survey and a study, and I've just kind of included some of the key headlines in here around the effect on employment and employees. So more than 4 in 5 people, British adults, think that gambling and debt can be a distraction for people at work, and it goes on and divides to 4.4 with a whole range of kind of concerns that they've raised around it. And then in terms of support agencies, there are lots of support agencies out there. I did a Google search and what support agencies were there. There are lots of them. The NHS website actually has got a dedicated page to it with a whole kind of list of what's there to support people. So kind of just to present this to you really, and in summary, Nuneaton and Bedworth, we don't know what the issue is for Nuneaton and Bedworth. We don't know what the issue is for Warwickshire, but we do know that nationally there are lots of issues associated with it. So I brought the paper to you for discussion, for you to determine A, whether, is it something that you want to take forward? If so, how? And one of the recommendations that I put in there was, because of the dynamics around gambling, there's so many different elements to it. There's there's the addiction, there's the support, there's the monitoring, there's the policies. As a council, we've got different departments who do different things for gambling. Is whether you wanted to work in party, perhaps, just to explore all those a bit more, so you can get an evidence base. So I'll just put it out to you for your kind of conversation and discussion, really.
Yeah, so as I say, it's something I've been trying to get looked at for a while, and the fact that we haven't got any figures to show anything is a bit alarming, really. The way that I came to look at this is because somebody approached me and their son had been gambling, and it got them into a lot of debt. But the only place that he could go, they could take him, was in Coventry. So they're already in debt, and now they've got to get to Coventry. Get to Coventry, sit around the table. The average debt that people are in is £100,000 around this table. And then, you know, this is only out today about the gambling firms, agree whistle television sport. I think we've got the facts there. The fact is, reported 1 in 8 of them 16-year-olds following gambling companies. It's a big national thing, and I just think that we, as a borough, need to know, is this is something that we do need to be concerned about, and what other things it's affecting us on as a borough. And really, that's why I want to bring it here and see what you want to do with it. You might want to do nothing with it, and then that's fine, but at least I've done more of it. So we've got a couple of speakers now, so Councillor Golby.
I think we might have a slightly hypocritical stance on this, because we use the borough lottery to raise funds, and that's gambling. We are the licensees for gambling establishments. We give them licences to operate within our borough. So
We have the licence, it's just that
Yeah,
the licence,
yeah. So it is, we could be causing people untold misery.
That might be something that comes out of
Yeah.
what the working group.
Yeah.
If you want to set up a working group and look into it, that might let me.
And this is the crux of the problem,
Yeah,
isn't
it
it?
is.
Yeah.
It is.
And you
No,
know.
I'm not saying it's not good.
Oh no, no, I know.
But it's,
no.
but you know, that's why I think we need to look at
Yeah.
it.
Oh, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
But it may be an uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do if it is?
Just in terms of
No.
the borough lottery, there are policies in place for a problem gambling, and people can opt out of it if they want to.
Yeah.
So we comply with everything the Gambling Commission asks us to do. Our policies, we've had to submit them all, and they've kind of approved them.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
we are regulated around that. But
I
take on
get
board
that,
something-
yeah, but in a perfect world, that would ease the pain for people that are in hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt, but it isn't
But
a
it
perfect world.
it could work out as well that that we bring licence into it, and we don't want to see
Yeah.
our street full of gambling.
Exactly,
I
yeah.
don't
No, I
know
don't,
the answer.
I don't disagree
I don't know
at
the
all.
answer, but
I
I just think that it's something that should be looked at, and if there isn't a problem with
Yeah.
the borough, there isn't a problem.
If
We've looked at it.
if we've got that where we have no data, I would completely agree that we need to look at it, because in this day and age, to have no data on something which is quite fundamental, why have we not got that? So
Because we
yeah,
haven't looked at it.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
That's why we should
Yeah.
be doing that. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Trimmins.
I think gambling addiction is as dreadful an addiction as any other. I think it blights as many lives, probably more than heroin and a whole bunch of other things like that. It truly does destroy people's relationships and ruins them financially, and bankruptcy might be, and counselling an end of the road for most of them, but I guess not. I guess they fall back into the previous ways, and the trouble is the gambling that's put before them is designed to be addictive and to maximise the profits of the firms. I loathe and detest fixed odds betting terminals. They should all be banned. I think if we're going to have a working party, it ought to have a very narrow focus on what we can do to help people. And first of all, you have to gather the data, and I think the only readily available data source to Nuneaton and Bedworth is going to come out of housing, and it's going to come out with those people that are presenting as potentially homeless, and not just under the chaotic lifestyle category, but what is their addiction? Is gambling an element of that? And I think we'll be horribly surprised that it is, in a lot of cases, for these young guys that are turning up. They are online gambling, they are doing it at night, every penny they can get, and they're borrowing money and they're not paying their rent, and that's why it's happening. So I think if we're going to set up a working party, it needs to do two things. Look at all the sources of data that we can use to gather the information locally, and then I think we need to look draconianly at the remedies. Is it become custom and practice for local authorities, for their licensing teams and committees to just, most people allow this kind of gambling, most people allow 2 fixed odds betting terminals in a shop, so we should go along with that in case we get an appeal. No, we need to look at what's the cutting edge of the law, what can we do to minimise this, And then that working party will have done something to help the people of the borough. It will have made a real difference. So I think if we can have a very narrow focused working party, I'd love to be on it. I think we just need to get the data, and then we need to see what we can do, because cutting it to £2 a bet is no help. People can still pump in hundreds of pounds a day, if not thousands, and these guys don't earn a fraction of that. So it's debt, and it's or stealing it or something like that. So I think, Chair, with if members agree, I think a narrowly focused working party that drills down on those two things could make a real difference.
I think you might be sort of cutting your nose off to spite, but I think you need to look at suicide and things like that as well, because that's where it ends up. And I've been to the recent suicide.
That's all the data that we need to pull in though, Chair.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm saying don't narrow yourself down to a couple of things. You need to look at it full on, really.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Well, yeah,
But you know, it's not what I think. Councillor Connaught.
Yeah, I agree, should do a working party. We've got an awful lot of betting shops in Abbey Street. We've got loads in places like Kingswood. You just look around the thing, and we must know some national data about how much a betting shop needs to take in to survive. And these are the most thriving shops we've got in our town, sadly. So we need to look at it, and we also need to get an idea how much is online and offline. Because I say there's an awful lot of physical gambling presence in Nuneaton, which is very worrying. But I've got no idea if that's just the tip of the iceberg, or whether it's 90-40, 90-10 online or 90-10 offline. Or from turnover of firms, just sort of.
How would you quantify that to a local area?
It won't be an easy working party, I won't say.
No.
But I've got you down. Councillor Hancock's.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, clearly there's an increasing recognition of the problems around gambling and its impact on society generally. And call me old-fashioned, but gambling has always been around, like drinking's always been around, but it tended to be in fairly regulated places. You know, you went to the pub or the off licence. That was the place you went to your drink. If you were going to have a bet, unless there was a runner in the factory, you went to the betting shop. But now it's becoming increasingly easy just to stay at home, and you know what happens with people that drink home? They drink more than they do when they go to the pub. You know, because of the accessible nature of the stuff, and that's the same in regards to gambling. We can get it on there, we can get it on the telly, we can go in the shop, you can do it wherever you like, you can go to the casino. And, you know, let's not automatically say this is a totally bad thing for some people. It's a part of their social life and they can manage it. A lot of people can't manage it. And that's where, you know, you need to get that data. But I'm here as a sub tonight, so I think a working party would be a good idea for it myself, because you can pull in the witnesses that you need. Because I spoke right at the start about the impact, and this impacts on everything really: health, planning, economy, housing, and licensing. I mean, in regards to housing, we should have some information there that when we're looking at an eviction because people haven't paid their rent, is it because it's linked to this? Might be that if people don't tell you that, then you're not going to know clearly. But there's issues about planning. Get the policy people in as witnesses to say, what can we do within our policies to stop an excess of betting shops in one street? Because actually, I think in our area, considering the nature of you know, we're not the wealthiest of places, I don't think we've actually been as badly affected as some places. You know, there are places around the country where they've got rows and rows of betting shops and they're in the poorest, most deprived areas. So maybe we can look at the planning policy. I suspect planning like licensing has its hands tied behind their back a lot of the times in regard to saying, no, we're not going to allow this because there'll be some rule somewhere saying that you have to. But if that's the case, you know, bring people in, bring our policy people in from planning and licensing and ask them about it, because then at least we might be able to direct it to the necessary government departments that it needs to go to look at it. But it's kind of encouraging this stuff out today, isn't there? You know, so there is the recognition of the impact on gambling.
It will be a big piece of work, but I think it will be interesting, though. I think the outcome will be worth it. Councillor Sergeant?
I think you need to, if you do a working party, I think you need to start with the end. So you need to start with the people with problems and work your way back, because you know what it's saying in these figures is 90% of people gamble online at home and 50% gamble using a laptop. So generally people aren't going to the shops, are they, to gamble? They're actually doing it on their phones at work. They're doing it at home on their iPads, laptops, etc. So I think if you went to a betting shop to try and get information from there, I think you would be, you know, 90% out on the actual true figures of what actually people are doing. I mean, I tend to buy a lottery ticket online. You know, I've bet on the Grand National and I've done it on my phone. I only do bet on horses once a year, and that's the Grand National. You know, so I think you need to find where the people are ending up and then work your way back to find out what they're actually doing. Because if they're going to betting shops, then yes, you can look at the policy of the planning policy and say, well, we've got 10 betting shops, we only need 5 or whatever it is. Or is it something, the problem with people betting online? In which case, there isn't much you're going to do about that, is there? Because you can't switch off.
Okay, Councillor Beaumont.
Chairman, I'd just draw your attention to page 33, which is the Gambling Commission, and a briefing paper for local authorities and local public health providers in February of this year. And there's a summary of recommendations at the bottom of page 33, which relates to local public health teams recognising gambling-related harm as a public health issue and its relevance in assessing risks to the well-being of communities. It goes on through several stages there. It includes child protection boards and safeguarding boards. And then when you go to page 41, it does get down to what it would expect a local authority to do. Take into account a wide range of factors, data and information held by the licensing authorities and its partners. Good local area profiles will increase awareness of local risks, which gives you a chance to examine Nuneaton and Bedworth. Improved information sharing, facilitate constructive engagement with licensees, and a more coordinated response to local risks. So there's a lot of guidance in here that a working party could pick up on. But I do think that the initial panel came home to me that as it's public health from Warwickshire, which could give you a firm base for a working party to begin with. And if you ask them to use their teams, because they've got local information is excellent in Warwickshire, I think. And they use the Office of National Statistics and so on, drill down into all that information and present you with a picture of Nuneaton and Bedworth, which would be quite effective in directing the efforts of the working party in gathering other, which tends to be anecdotal evidence rather than a firm base. So if it started from that, I think you would be doing some useful work that could perhaps help deal with the issue locally. As far as too many betting shops is concerned, well, clearly planning don't have any guidance as to how many betting shops it would allow in a single street, in an area, in a particular population. And if that is one of the answers, then perhaps you could produce planning guidance which enables us to control how many of these shops there are and where they would be located. So I think there's quite a bit of work to be done, but I do think it starts with Warwickshire getting hold of the statistics through public health and presenting a picture of Nuneaton and Bedworth, which gives you something firm to work from.
But Warwickshire haven't done anything.
Well, that's why I think maybe the message should be ask Warwickshire to provide enough information
I can tell you what,
for a working party to start.
Warwickshire are watching us because we've had it on this work programme. That's true. They're watching us to see what we do.
Are they?
Yeah.
Right. Well, we start, I suggest, with asking Warwickshire to do some statistics around Nuneaton and Bedworth as far as gambling and the gambling problems are concerned. Because this commission has done quite a good job, I think. There's really a lot of interesting stuff in.
There's some good national information,
Yeah.
but there's no local information.
Well, it does suggest a strategy for interpreting it locally.
Yeah.
And one of the ways of doing it would be ourselves and Warwickshire working together to produce something that starts to improve the local environment and some control on what is a very dangerous practice.
Okay, I've got a few more speakers and then we really need to move on to what we're going to do here. Councillor Nash?
I would say what Councillor Hancock and Councillor Bowman have just said. We can't do anything about the National Lottery. We can't do anything about what goes on behind closed doors, on phones and stuff. But what we can do, which I think you've just alluded to, is to become almost an example to other authorities of what we can do. So planning, you know, I'm thinking of Bedworth. You know, you've got Wetherspoons there, right, and then you've got 2 betting shops immediately opposite. And so that comes down to planning. Do we want 10 in a high street? No, we don't. And so I think, you know, licensing and planning where we put these shops, we've really got to work at. You know, also, what about education? Does education come into, you know, can we do something about educating? Is there any education about gambling in schools? I don't know, because I'm not a teacher. But is there something that we could do along with, you know, what we discussed earlier about, you know, sex education and that kind of thing? Should gambling now be a part of that? You know, as children have got Fortnite, you know, they're costing their parents hundreds of pounds, some of them. You know, is there something we can do in that, and that would come up hopefully in the working party
these
as
sort
well.
of things will all come out in the working
Yeah.
party.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting. Councillor Colby?
I think we should also look at demographics, not only, I mean we're talking about online gambling being massive now, but online bingo, that's huge, and that is actually gambling.
I'll class that as same.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't. But that's a completely different demographic to the one that you were talking about with the young men and everything else. Traditionally, bingo is not a young man's game.
You ain't seen my dobber.
Is it treated?
Yeah. Is that an offer? You're going to bring that to your working group? Anyway, what I was going to say was I'd like to propose a motion to support the creation of a working group, so we can actually look at and assess the impact of gambling on the health and well-being of the residents in Nuneaton. So I think, yeah, it would be a really worthwhile endeavour to do that.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, do we still...
Can I just it was actually it was a little bit across because it's Rachel actually. So from the bits that you've got here, this is all local stuff to us. So when, you know, people are caught with any crime rate they're doing, is it then assessed that they might have a gambling problem and doing it to get money from crime? Is that? I know it's what we've already spoke about, but this is all local data. So
I'm not aware that there's any correlation or there's been anything identified in terms of what motivates people. As in, sorry, let me reword it. I don't think there's any evidence that would demonstrate that gambling is a motivating factor in somebody committing a crime.
Okay.
There's evidence that drugs and alcohol are a motivating factor, say, for acquisitive crime for drugs and violence for alcohol. But in terms of gambling, I'm not aware of anything that's been
Because it's
shown.
in the it's interesting because theft they've said is increased because of that. So it's interesting if it hasn't come through locally. That's a good sign.
Well, I think all sorts of things like that will come out of it, but we've got nothing at the minute.
Yeah.
Got nothing at all because we've never looked at it.
Yeah.
So, Councillor Brad.
Chair, thank you. I was going to say I would support the idea of putting together a working party on this. I would echo what Councillor Troman said though about making the focus fairly narrow. The danger with this subject is it's so wide, there is very little data. A working party can become very woolly and lose focus because there's so many competing ideas of what it should be doing. So I would, there's no reason why a working party cannot focus on one issue after another and gather data on a specific point and produce a report based on it. It doesn't have to be an overarching report at the first attempt. It can be a working party that looks at specific aspects, gathers data, produces a report, moves on to the next aspect. Because then you're actually using almost like task and finish within your working party.
Yeah.
And I would definitely think that's the way to go forward.
I'm Chair, as you just
That's all I want to say anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you made the point about getting the data. I don't think anyone disagrees with we should look widely at and get all the data sources we can. But I think I'm agreeing with Councillor Brown. We need to focus what the end result is on things the borough can affect. Yeah. I don't think us telling kind of gambling companies that they're evil or that government should change this law or that law is going to help us. It's not in our gift.
We shouldn't think we're smarter than they are because really they're smarter than us. That's why they're successful.
We should just focus on what we can affect directly as Nuneaton and Bedworth.
If we do something to move one aspect of it, we know it'll just pop up somewhere else.
I'm smarter than them because I don't do it.
Right, okay.
Smart is to make money out.
So,
smart person doesn't bother with it.
So the recommendations are that members of the panel note the report, which we've noted. Hoping you've read the additional stuff, and that members of the panel consider whether the working group be established to explore this item further. I think it's around the table that we want to do that. Yeah. So the next is who wants to be on the working group. Yeah, okay, when we send it, can you send it out and...
Have we got time scales because I've got just kind of factor in life. Really?
You've got a lot?
No, that's the problem. I haven't got one.
When they'll get in touch with you. If we can get enough off this external scrutiny, then fine. If not, we'll have to go to further.
Actually, can I suggest that you throw it out to all councillors and co-opted members? I think there might be people that have got valuable insight or a real interest in this.
The problem with that is we can only have so many councillors on work.
Yeah, well, I fear it might be more about you struggling to find the numbers, so that's why I'd go.
No, I think this one will be. I don't know, but let's see.
I mean, dates willing, I think,
yeah. When we'll be in touch. Okay? Brilliant. So forward plan. Forward plan, page 43. So as you know, this is on every scrutiny, and it's for you to look at, see if there's anything that you did want to question really. If not, you do all get the link to that as well. If not, we'll move on. Councillor Chronicle.
We've been given a new version and a few changes, obviously updated. A few things that seem to have changed is the parking seems to have dropped off, and the sports and physical activity seems to now be a briefing note. I don't know where we are on those and why, what's happening with sports development, what's happening with parking. I'm on the wrong one, so ignore me.
What, so you're not on forward plan?
I was on work.
Yeah, so forward plan, nobody's got any questions. So we'll go to the work programme now on 47. it. That's the times that we've got set in to try and get things dealt with. Councillor Concoy, you've got what on this?
I was just mentioning the parking was on the version we got given before, and it's not on the new version. And there's an issue with the
Right.
sports development
Yeah.
changing.
I'll tell you on the parking. The parking that was on the other one was the one about the Warwickshire parking enforcers. And you get a link to that anyway, and there's nothing we can do on that. And that was just for information. And the other one was what?
Just to clarify what's happening with sports development, because on the original one it said transfer to internal OSP, and on the new one it says an annual briefing note. So
Sports development. That's yeah. Change to briefing note.
but Chair, does that mean we can question the briefing notes, or what happens to the briefing notes?
You have to question the briefing note, yeah. And then is everybody else happy with the times and dates that are on the rest of the stuff?
Chair, just out of interest, is it the other OSB then that looks at car parking?
No, not that car parking. That car parking is the one that we monitor on our car park. The one that was on here was the one that we did.
Oh, the enforcement from Warwickshire, yeah. So this OSB does still look at our car parks?
No, that's on the internal.
The internal one, that's great. Okay,
This one, the reason that the county one does it, there's nothing we can do that. All we do is look at that link that we get sent.
Yeah.
So, and we can make suggestions to where we want them to go anyway. So there's no reason for it to be on there.
I've done that without listening.
Right, okay. So if that's everything then, once again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thank you for.